the recording, please. Okay, I will call the January 25th, 2022 regular meeting of the City Council to order. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance, and I'll lead tonight.
Of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Laura, roll call, please.
Mayor Holtzclaw,
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Vignal,
Here.
Councilmember Bond, Councilmember Cavallari,
Here.
Councilmember Steckler,
Here.
Councilmember Allison,
Here.
Councilmember Duque.
Here.
Councilmember Bond notified the Mayor Pro Tem earlier this afternoon that he was under the weather and may not be here. So why don't we go ahead and have a motion to excuse? It doesn't look like he's going to make it.
Motion to excuse Councilmember Bond.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, audience communication, as always, we begin the meeting. Anyone like to speak to the council? I think I can see everyone on my screen. Not seeing any yellow hands raised. Not, oh, I have a member of the audience. Go ahead. Name and address, and if you could try to keep your comments to 3 minutes.
Yeah, I take the mask off or, okay. Mayor Holtzclaw, Mayor Pro Tem Vinal, and members of the council, thank you for taking my comments tonight. My name is Brian Fawcett. I've been a resident of Mill Creek for 9 years. 2 years initially at the Reserve at Town Center nearby. Currently reside at townhomes at Mill Creek Meadows out by the farm. And that's my reason, my raison d'etre this evening is to, and I understand there will be a presentation on the status of the leasing arrangements, the commercial leasing arrangements at the farm. I watched it with interest. I wish that I had been more involved a few years back when this project was given the green light to go forward. I guess in my naivety, I was envisioning something akin to what Woodinville is doing in the winery district, what Kirkland has done in the Totem Lake area, and what Linwood is presently doing at the Alderwood Mall. But then I came to realize that we don't have the critical mass that they do. And so what I see in my backyard are 300 rather sterile apartment units. And I'm encouraged that there will be retail. But if we have another nail salon, another teriyaki place, we have a strip mall. And so I'm obviously concerned about the quality of life in Mill Creek. And I would only ask the mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, and the council, what do you envision the city of Mill Creek looking like going forward? We have 300 apartment units that are affordable, but is that something that was handed on down from high? Or is that genuinely the direction that we wanted to go? So I thank you for taking my comments.
Thank you, Mr. Fawcett. Anyone else like to address the council? Seeing none, there'll be another opportunity.
Wait.
Oh, did I miss?
There's a hand raised on mine.
Oh, why am I not seeing all the, oh, I'm sorry. Ms. Tron, go ahead. Sorry about that.
Hi, no worries. Thank you. Hi, my name is Han Tron. I live in the adjacent city of Bothell. A Mill Creek resident called me in to speak regarding the consideration of the expansion of the anti-camping ordinance due to my advocacy work. Excuse me. I'm going to share a bit of my experience and some data real quick here. Starting with the data, when an unhoused individual is picked up by police, they might spend 3 days at a hospital or 3 months in jail, depending on the situation. And this can cost the city roughly $25,000 per person. For $25,000, there's a program that is not run by the county that Mill Creek is in, but by King County called Health Through Housing. And it can actually house someone for a year for $25,000 for the amount that they would spend a few days in jail or a few days in the hospital. So urging the city to consider something like this for the county you're in. Also, just based on of experience, sweeping away tents and displacing unhoused people has a negative impact for everyone, not just the unhoused folks, but also the people surrounding in the surrounding area. In reading the draft ordinance, the adoption of Martin versus City of Boise from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals is a step in the right direction, since there should be no penalty, including no fines and no imprisonment for being unhoused. Thank you for considering my words, and I hope you're able to connect with people regarding programs such as health through housing. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments. Is there anyone else? See no one in the audience. Is there anyone online? Am I missing anyone? No. Okay, I don't see any further hands, so there'll be another opportunity at the end of the meeting. With that, we'll move into presentations. I'm going to turn it over to the acting chief to welcome and recognize our 2 new lateral hires.
Thank you, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, council members. Have members of the department funneling in. We're actually very excited tonight to introduce 2 of our new lateral hires here at the city of Mill Creek. Officer Ojeda joined the Mill Creek Police Department as a lateral from Tulalip. He also served with the city of, or actually the county of Harrison, Texas for 8 years. Originally from Houston, Texas. So please welcome Officer Ojeda. Officer Roy joined the Mill Creek Police Department as a lateral from Seattle Police Department. She's a 5-year veteran, originally from Long Island, New York, and previously with the New York Police Department. So Officer Roy. I'll have them join me up front.
You want to do a picture?
Yeah, should we do a picture?
Where do you want us? In front of the table? Not to shake hands, you know? Yes, I never know.
But that time they were actually on it that time, so usually they're not on it.
Yeah, yeah. That was good news.
Tom, are you going to be introducing our next guest for the next presentation?
I am.
Go ahead.
Good evening, members of the council. Good to see you. haven't been standing here for, I think it's 2 years, so it's
God.
a big night for me. Tonight, I'm really pleased to introduce Jennifer Vangerpin. She's the manager up at the farm with Vintage Housing. And I've been monitoring sort of some of the Facebook kind of groups with Mill Creek. And I've also listened to the council meetings. You may not know it, but I'm kind of there in the background. And I've heard a lot of questions. People want to know what's going on at the farm. Why aren't we seeing anything? Well, the show's only finished about 2-3 months ago, and it takes time to get permits run, and it takes time with supply chain issues in getting the construction. But the TIs are about to start happening. We're issuing some permits recently. And so what we did is we've known some things in the past, but it's sort of their story to tell. There are non-disclosure agreements. They're want to have their own messaging. And so what I thought after hearing all this stuff is to ask them to come and tell their story. So Jennifer has been kind enough to agree to come here and give you a status of what's going to be happening soon. So Jennifer, are you there?
I am here. Thank you so much for the warm introduction. Yeah, obviously, there's been a lot of curiosity, a lot of activity, and then I think, just the exciting news that was made, which this council meeting, was perfect timing for just hours after the, national, if not worldwide news that was made about the incoming tenant that we have, which is Amazon Go. So, there's been a lot of speculation over who this is. And, I just think for Mill Creek in general, outside of the fact that I am incredibly honored to have, a tenant coming in with such a strong, use base, and that's going to bring so much to the city of Mill Creek. I really think that the excitement that we have here, it's been probably a couple years of hard work and dedication to make sure that this is coming. But, it's putting Mill Creek on the map, which is something I'm honored to be able to be a part of for one of their first test locations of this Amazon Go. I do know that there's some extra stuff happening inside of that building that we don't fully have, that we're not made aware of. So I feel like as they gear up to open and make more announcements, that we're just going to constantly be surprised and super excited. So they're one of our large anchor tenants coming. And then I'm also really excited to announce that we have leased a very large percentage of the space, over 36,000 square feet to a hotel. So, a worldwide hotel brand. So it's under the partnership of Wyndham with La Quinta, and they have, well, this type of hotel use, boutique hotel use, is not something that they have ever been, involved in. It's not part of their brand. They are, brand presidents I've personally met with out at the site while they were looking at it, and they are so thrilled and excited to come to Mill Creek because, as we're aware, there's some, hotel housing along the I-5 corridor up towards Everett, but really for the needs of the Mill Creek residents and families traveling for sports and, all those things. We're excited to be able to have about 76 hotel rooms that are going to be brought in. And it's not going to be your typical La Quinta. We've been told, the ability to have that lodge boutique feel, and it's just going to be a whole new brand for them. So I think really positive, impactful businesses that are coming in. We've got, as Tom said, several of these groups we're still under NDA, and it's tough for me to not disclose, but I can't. So Tom, do you want to pop up are you able to share on the screen who we have coming now that I announced are kind of two big groups? So as you can see, if it's showing on the screen for everybody, there is 81,581 square feet of commercial space, which disappeared. My slideshow was very quick. But we've got some great tenant mixes. We wanted to make sure that it was something that was going to benefit the overall community. So there is a nail salon. This is a current Mill Creek tenant who is relocating. So they are excited to be able to be, in a space that's got the, visibility and the residents to serve the purpose to a breakfast and lunch cafe, which I can tell you guys that the food is going to be phenomenal. I'm really excited about these guys, along with an expanding brewery restaurant group that's coming in. And then obviously Amazon Go. And one thing that I heard from the start of all this, you guys, is that there's nowhere to eat good steaks out around here. Like not just Mill Creek, but like Snohomish County. And so we were able to bring in a specialty steakhouse, which very excited about that. It's got like the old Las Vegas, or Reno, hotel room or hotel type vibe of, just very, the look is great. And as soon as that, and it's still affordable pricing, which is good. So whether it's, the affordable housing residents or just the general public, it's great. And, wine bar that also has dining, the ramen noodle place, a retail cable and phone communication store that I can't disclose the tenant, but I promise that it'll be of great benefit to the area. Medical clinic, super excited about this medical clinic. It's going to serve just tons of needs in a small space. So, and then several different fitness options, as well as dental, the gourmet chicken sandwich place, which I'm not obviously still allowed to tell. It's painful. I just want to share all this good stuff, but it is going to be one of their flagship stores, and it is under a very national brand that is excited to be coming to the town. So I think it's going to be close to as big as Amazon Go. But, I'm definitely going to be a line around the building for that one for a little while. So, and then of course, just other, a couple other small like art studio and children's clothing store and some consignment. So I'm clearly very passionate about this. I've been involved in it since, the early days of presenting to the city, trying to get this project to come to fruition. And now that it's, has, and we've made it through the pandemic, I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys might have for me about what we have coming for you.
News, Councilmember Steckler.
Hi, Jen. Wow, great news. A couple quick questions. Just to confirm on the Wyndham space, that is coming out of the retail space, not out of the affordable housing space, correct?
All of this is out of the retail space. So
That's
we
right,
have the two different retail types. Some of it's the standalone, which borders the 132nd. And then some of it is under buildings. So that'll be under the residential buildings on both E and F buildings.
Got it. Just want to confirm that this is all outside of the hotel, the apartment 300.
Absolutely. Yep.
And then of the 81,500 square feet, what does that represent in the total retail space that you do have available? Is that 50% or 20% or?
The 81,581 is 100%. So we are 100% committed at this point to our retail space.
You are?
We
Wow.
are.
That's impressive.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
It was no small feat through,
That's off the chart. Congratulations. That's
yeah,
incredible.
thank you very much.
Wow. I'm done.
Other questions? Didn't leave us with any questions asked. There's so much good news. That's exciting to hear. Congratulations. I'm sure it was a lot of work and effort to get that space filled up. So it's exciting to hear that you're at 100%. It's amazing.
Yes, it was very, happened Friday, and I was definitely ready to celebrate, until they're open and, the city can, start using, the members of the community can start using the retail spaces, but every tenant is eager. As Tom said, he's reviewing permits and, so I appreciate you guys through the city of Mill Creek and the planning department, supporting this project and allowing, our tenants to start building out. So I'm very excited about seeing it all open.
Councilmember Cavallari.
Thank you, Mayor. Just briefly, great presentation, and it is exciting news. Great job all the way around to everyone.
Thank you.
I had a chance to go up there and interact with several families up there recently, and what I was really impressed with, that I was surprised how the word got around. Like, many of the tenants are from out of state, from Oregon, California, different parts of the United States. That's pretty impressive that you've got an outreach or a footprint that's really reaching out like that. So what is the percentage as far as residency now at the farm, tenants?
I think there was definitely some concern going into the, ability to fill a building as large as this for, the residential households and the mix of the 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms during the global pandemic, when people are, more afraid to move. We're leasing, we typically on one of our projects, we've got 48 plus buildings under that we've developed so far that are occupied. And, on average, we get about 30 rentals a month. We're getting 35 to 45 leases a week. So since we started moving people in, I want to say like close to April we are, of the 354 units, we are 65% occupied and 75% leased. So, typically these take over a year to do. And just the desire to be here is phenomenal. That was a really long answer for you, but 65% occupied and 75% leased.
It was incredible. And you had kind of a system where I saw it was you had Paul and you had everybody like safely, of course,
Yes.
filing in behind one another to get to the next agent. So the process seemed to be flowing smoothly. So kudos to all of you involved. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Jennifer, do you have any update on the trail?
We need to connect on that, Tom, actually. We're maintaining it. We're making sure that it's secured so there's no night access. I do know that there's people who, walk through the walking path that from the property into the, as we call it, the sanctuary. And commercial management's working on the plan for, the rules and opening it. But I'm hoping we can connect in the next week or so and reschedule an opening meeting.
Thank you, Jennifer, for the update. It's great to hear. Good work.
You're welcome. I'll appreciate your guys' time and I hope you have a good rest of your meeting.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you.
You too. Thanks. Bye.
Okay, we're on to new business. Back to Acting Chief White. Is he reaching us virtually this time? I'm trying to see where he's.
Yeah, that's correct.
I don't see. Oh, there he is. Acting Chief White, the floor is yours.
I'm sorry, I got called away from my desk.
Yours.
Thank you, Laurel. So Mayor Pro Tem, Council, it's my privilege to talk to you today about the request to move forward with the purchase of new fleet vehicles for the police department. In the current budget cycle, 2021-2022, Council approved the budget for up to $116,000 towards the purchase of new vehicles for the police department. These vehicles are vehicles that have either met their depreciation schedule or exceeded their expected service life. We have identified 3 vehicles that will be replaced by the purchase of these 3 vehicles. Vehicles that have been identified as needing to be cycled out of service are vehicle number 32, which is currently our police support officer vehicle. It's an F-150 purchased in 2009. Current mileage on that vehicle is 115,000 miles. And it's starting to have significant maintenance expenditures as well. Vehicle number 38 is a Ford Taurus sedan purchased in 2013. Current mileage on that vehicle is 65,459 miles. However, there's extensive maintenance issues with that vehicle. We have a transmission that is on its way out, as well as a failing engine. It also is, due to the fact that it's assigned as a backup canine vehicle, there's a cage and other things that inside the vehicle that prohibit us from using it for prisoner transports and being repurposed for another position. And finally, vehicle number 40, which is a Ford utility purchased in 2015. The current mileage on that vehicle is 116,674 miles. All three of these vehicles have extensive maintenance issues right now and should probably have exceeded their service life. Next slide, please. Due to a very short contract pricing window for purchases within the state of Washington on the contract pricing list, which closed on January 6th, we actually placed three orders for vehicles to replace the vehicles listed on the previous slide. One of the replacement vehicles, vehicle number 53, would be a Ford F-150 four-wheel drive to replace the current PSO vehicle. The next one would be number 54, which is a police F-150 responder. That would replace the current K9 vehicle, and the existing K9 vehicle would then be moved to a backup for the K9 unit. Vehicle number 55 is a Ford utility all-wheel drive. This is also going to be placed into the patrol fleet, which would replace vehicle number 40. These are some photographs of the vehicles that we'd be purchasing, pretty consistent with what we've been purchasing in the past. The Ford F-150 for the K9 truck does provide us with a bit more cargo space due to the amount of equipment that K9 officers need to carry to accommodate training and things of that nature. Next slide, please. So at the end of the night, we're requesting council approval to move forward with a budgeted fleet purchase up to $191,000. $115,199 total vehicle order, not to exceed the budget amount of $116,000 for the vehicles themselves. $75,000 remaining vehicle costs associated with building police vehicles such as lighting, consoles, things of that nature, radios, will be covered by existing line items within the current Mill Creek Police budget. And with that, I'll turn it over to council for questions.
Chief?
I'm sorry, say again?
I was asking if there's any questions for you, and I'm not seeing any questions. So then I ask, are there any motions?
I'll make a motion, Mayor. Make a motion to approve the budgeted purchase item for police vehicles. I don't have a budget, a resolution number here. Do we even need one if it's budgeted?
No.
Yeah, I didn't think so. So I guess my motion will be a little bit more plain than that. Motion to approve Acting Chief White's budget presentation.
Second.
Grant, is this properly a motion, a resolution? Is it just a motion to authorize them to proceed as presented?
I don't think you even need a motion because, as Laurel mentioned, it's already in the budget. We don't have a contract. So I think it's really informational.
Okay.
Mayor.
Okay.
We just need approval because it is over the $50,000 threshold. So we just need council to give us the head nod.
How about a
Authorize
motion
the
to- how
city
about a
to
motion
move
to
forward
approve?
as presented. Is that your motion, Vince?
Yes, sir.
That was seconded by the Mayor Pro Tem. Okay, is there any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? You have your authorization to proceed.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
Mayor.
Acting Chief. Thank you, Laurel. Okay, that brings us to the old and continuing business of the fire service for the city of Mill Creek. Director Todd.
Thank you. Let me get to the right slide here. Council, staff. Once again, we are here to talk about fire and EMS services. Just a quick process recap. Going to continue deliberating the details this month and next month. Schedule calls for discussion and public comment opportunity at every meeting in January, but particularly we focused attention through a press release we put out last week, and we'll be focusing on that again for a discussion next week on February 1st and heading towards a decision, hopefully a decision on February 8th by the council. If you decide to proceed, remember that's going to call for the schedule calls for annexation vote on April 26th. So for tonight, we're going to follow up from what we did last week. Remember last week you went through and looked at consensus for the budget plan if annexation is approved. And we also introduced the topic on if annexation is not approved, what you would do. So we're going to talk about those two things tonight. And I'm going to give you a timeline reminder. And hopefully tonight that's half an hour, not the hour and a half last week. So I'll try to be quicker. Principles and goals. This is what, remember, we did a lot of brainstorming last week, but this is what we looked back at that and looked at the common themes. Really, when you talked about the general policy principles and goals, came down to kind of an overall sense of a conservative approach that's true to the city's mission and goals. A conservative approach seemed very important. Also very important to you to maintain the quality and level of service long-term. So those are fundamentals. And then I looked at all the things you brainstormed about. It really came down to things that I would summarize in those next 3 points: simplicity, clarity for voters, recognizing that we had a short time frame to make a decision, and that the banked capacity allows more thoughtful work during the 2023-2024 budgeting cycle, and minimizing uncertainty overall. We don't know, as the city manager pointed out, we don't know what the voters will do, but it's important if we keep it simple, non-complex, and keep this thing moving. That's the best thing we can do. So minimizing uncertainty. At the time we got done with all the discussion about the options, remember we had 1, 2, 3, 4. The general consensus was for the preferred approach was this revenue neutral to city budget, which is called option 3. And there's the pros are listed there: simplicity, citizens have full amount for the new provider. It was very transparent, makes it clear the city is not collecting anything for providing fire response or emergency medical services. It avoids confusion on what any retained amount would be used for. Council has time to consider enhanced new services separately as part of the normal budgeting process. So there's a lot of pros. After you talked about it some more, somebody identified that the con is that it doesn't provide funds for the fire marshal, fire inspection, and station purchase. As we talked about that fire marshal contract, fire inspection contracts, probably about $100,000. We're working on that. That's again an estimate because we don't have good data on what we do today under a current contract. But we're working on that detail with South County Fire, but it's on that order of magnitude. And as the mayor pointed out and reminded us last week, we get revenue when a developer comes in, we get revenue for those fire marshal services, which are typically development review. We don't currently collect money for fire inspections, which is an annual thing for business to do, but that's something you could entertain in the future. In the station purchase, remember we have an option to buy the station on the same amount for 20 years, about $60,000. So it doesn't provide, this approach, pure option 3, doesn't provide money for that, but your decision or your consensus was looking at that and see if there's other things we can do in the future. Mr. Mayor.
Just to clarify on the fire inspection, we haven't collected for that because that has been part of our contract with Fire District 7.
Well said. Yes, that's been wrapped into the contract. And we talked a little bit about the details, but because of the way that the RFA is set up, they've got cities and counties. So therefore they need to charge us to do that. But anyway, it's a small number in the whole thing. So again, the consensus was that option 3. A little bit of talk about option 2, which was the option of retaining some money for the fire marshal, fire inspection. We decided that option 3 was really kind of the general consensus. Implement that. How do you implement option number 3? Number 1, you would make a commitment to voters to reduce the general property tax levy in 2023 by $2.6 million. That's about 51 cents per thousand. The second piece is you let the fire levy expire. Even if it was active when you annex, you lose that, but it is expiring at the end of this year. And so that's the $1.7 million. The difference between what we're paying this year, 2022 and 2023, and that's the 37 cents per thousand. So again, that's the 2.6 and the 1.7 is the 4.3 we've been talking about. The 51 cents and the 37 cents is the 88 cents. And so we would no longer be receiving either property tax or EMS tax levies for that 4.3 million, which is how we pay for fire today. I'm checking in. So that's kind of where we were. This is our chance to check in. Is that kind of where we are? Is that how you want to proceed? Or are there more things that we missed? Or that after you've slept on it for a week, you want to bring up?
6 head nods.
6 head nods. And Councilmember Bond somewhere is also nodding his head. All right. So now we're flipping over the other part. So if annexation doesn't get approved, what do we do? And so you entertained that topic to begin with last week, but I've taken some, what we heard last week and decided to put into some proposals. So remember, if doesn't pass, we need to have a funding plan in place for that interim service contract for 2023. And if you took it out to vote and didn't get it for 2024, same thing. Pretty much focusing on 2023 to begin with. But even at that, it's going to take several components. Remember our chart, and I'll show it to you again in a minute. It takes more than just one thing to get to the amount of money service contract, because the service contract is more than we have collected in the past. If we're renewing the EMS levy or raising the general tax levy, you would have to go out to the voters. And to get that on the ballot for August, you'd have to make that decision by May 13th. So that's one reason we're talking about it now, is that if that election doesn't go as we would hope it go, as you might hope it would go, we have a quick turnaround. So that's why we're talking about this tonight. If you said, let's wait till the November general election, that's August 2nd, but most advisors would say, don't wait till the last minute because it is important for us to have funding for that in the future. So reminding you from the chart, what I've told these up here, it's $6.1 million versus the 4.3 is what the city needs to have if we were forced to use this safety net contract in 2023 and 2024. That's the $6.4 million. So everybody familiar with that chart? We're moving quickly, but that's what we're looking for, is how do you get to 6.1 and how do you get to 6.4? Instead of 1, 2, 3, we're going to call them A, B, C. So don't get confused. The 3 options are going to be coming at you. So option A, I'm going to call it nickname 2 taxes and 2 votes. What you do is you continue that 2.6 out of our general fund levy that's already in place, not changing that. That's coming out now. Continue to go with that. You would renew the property tax, the EMS levy for $2.5 million. That's the maximum 50 cents times our approximately $5 billion AV. So 50 cents times 5 billion is the 2.5 million. That's the most you can get out of an EMS levy. And that would require going to the voters and getting a yes vote. So either in August or November, you would work on doing that. And then under this option A, I would propose you'd also look at a special general property tax lid lift. So you'd go to the voters and say, we want more than the state rules allowed, more than the 1%. We need another $1.0 million in 2023 and 1.3 in 2024. So that would take an extra yes vote, another measure that would have to go to the voters in August and or November. So down there, I spelled it out. So the required actions, if you wanted to go with this approach, August 2022, you'd pass a ballot measure, you'd attempt to pass a ballot measure, 50 cents EMS levy, probably set that at 6 years. Levy lid lift of 23 cents for 2 or more years. .0 plus 1.3 million in the 2 years, and I took it and split it because you wouldn't want to go back every year and do this. You'd probably pass the measure for the 2 years worth. Does that kind of make sense? So both of those would need to pass under this option. That's the 2 taxes, the 2 votes. You both need to pass. If it doesn't pass in August, you could put on the November ballot. If they don't pass in November, then somewhere we would need to come up with the 2.5 million if the EMS levy part failed, or we'd have to come up with a 1 million if the general levy part failed, or 3.5 million if they both failed. You could use some of our reserves. You could use ARPA funds. We talked about that a little bit last week. That's not, it kind of works for about a year, but it makes your reserves go really low and takes a big hunk of that ARPA money. And then you'd be forced to run the ballot measures again in 2024, both for the annexation, hopefully to annex in 2024, and again to run those levies if it didn't pass. I'm going to pause there. That's a lot of numbers. That's a lot of details, but does that make sense? Or can I explain it again somehow?
Increased contract price with South County that we'd have to pay. So it increases $1 million above what we currently are paying in 2023, and then another 1.3.
Yeah, so I'm going to go back to this chart. So remember the green is what you're already collecting general property tax levy. The yellow in 2022 is 1.7 because our levy has gone down from 50 cents to 37 cents. If you raise it back up to 50 cents, that's the 2.5 you see right there in 2023. So that gives you the total of those two, 2.6 and 2.5. There's 5.1, but you need to get to 6.1. So that's the other $1 million that I'm proposing. And under this option A, you would raise the property tax levy. So instead of being just 2.6, all you can right now, as council, all you can do is raise it by 1%. So instead you go to the voters and get permission to raise it by another $1 million. So your general levy would go up. I shouldn't have said you've only got 2.6. You got 6.6, 2.6 of which is going to fire, but you need to raise it by another $1 million to be able to have property tax pay for that. I'm sorry if I confused people there.
Councilmember Steckler?
Yeah, Mike, my thought was, you're right. It's a lot of numbers and it's a lot of different votes that have to pass. It's a lot of different levers that have to move in the right direction. Wouldn't it be easier to just say, like, for example, the EMS levy is 6 years and we only need 2 years worth of revenue for this? We're just trying to cover 2 years. Wouldn't it be easier just to continue the 2.6, continue to do what we can with property tax and the balance be that special property tax lid? Just condense it all into one, forget the EMS.
Are you my straight man? Because that's
Oh.
option number B is, okay, maybe you don't want to go with two tax votes because it's difficult. So I'm going to propose here, option B, we one tax and one vote. So instead of using the EMS levy, which doesn't get you enough, those are typically more normal. Voters are used to EMS levies, but they only go up to that 2.5 million. We need 3.5 million. So instead you'd go to just a single vote for a general property tax levy lid lift. Now we need a yes vote, 3.5 million in 2023, 3.8 in 2024. It's kind of a defeatist attitude, but to make it so you wouldn't have to go back again, you'd probably pass it for the 2. So again, I've taken that number and averaged it. So you see down here in red, 3.65 each of those 2 years. Laurel says that's great. It's a biennium. I get 3.65 1 year and 3.65 the other year. I got enough to pay for the 3.5 and the 3.8. So I would take an August 2022 election down there on the required actions, the ballot measure for that. And you can see the number is that's 73 cents.
Okay.
That's a big number that can be scary to people, but that's what it would be. If it doesn't pass in August, you put it back on the ballot in November. If it doesn't pass in November, then you need to pull that $3.5 million from reserves or ARPA for 2023. That is where you run into problems. Now our reserves are down to 3 million, and we really have to have about 4.2 to comply with our standards in terms of having adequate reserves. You could use option B strategy for 2023. And then in August, if that didn't go, you could switch strategies to option A, which was, okay, let's try EMS tax and a smaller general tax in November, but now you're going to go back to the 2 taxes, 2 votes approach, but you could switch between those 2. And in all cases, if it doesn't pass, you'd have to run the ballot measures again in 2024. Well, even if it does pass, you'd have the annexation vote in 2024. If it doesn't pass, then you have levies again. There, the general property tax levy overall for the city is $1.29. So that $1.29 plus the 73 cents would give us a rate of $2, $2.02. It's a bigger number than we've seen at Mill Creek. Show for option 3, but this is the 2 taxes, 1 vote. Councilmember Bond would be here. So again, leave the general property tax levy in place. You go out and get that yes vote on the renewed EMS levy for 2.5 million. And how do you get that million in 23 and $1.3 million in 2024? Okay, well, you could go out there and do it with a utility tax. So you'd establish a utility tax. I said it didn't take a vote because you can do that councilmatically. So what you would do, the required actions would be same election for that EMS voted tax, August election, pass the ballot measure. If it doesn't pass, you could put it again on the ballot in November. But it would take a lot of the money. And then you run your ballot measures again in 2024. And it's not either or, it's and you'd have to establish a utility tax or something similar to that to take effect in January 2023. So here's my example. It's kind of like I think we talked about last week. For example, there's about 8,000 households in Mill Creek, renters, owners altogether. If you assumed your average bill for cell phone and cable together, those two things together was $225 a month, which seems mostly kind of reasonable. You'd set your rate at 4.6 on those two utilities in 2023, and you'd set it at the 6%, which is the limit in 2024. So I worked the numbers backwards. So that's the maximum you could do. If the bills were actually higher than that, then you could set a lower rate. But the point is somehow you'll be asking voters and taxpayers to provide 1 million in 2023 and 1.3 million in 2024 towards fire through some sort of utility tax. I'll pause there. So that's option C. And those are the three choices I'm going to give you to kind of kick around and think about. We talked last week, you could dip into reserves, you could do some special fees. This one is more complex for the city. You can imagine if we want to instill a utility tax for the first time, that's a whole thing we've never been to before. It's all doable, but there's a bunch of work, but it is a council and staff action, as opposed to having to go to the voters to ask for permission. I still think many of you would like to have the voters agree this is a good way to go. And there's some pros and cons between a utility tax and a property tax that you could debate. But the point is that it would take only one vote to get there. And you'd have two bites, both in August and in November, to get that EMS levy passed, which maybe is a little bit simpler in terms of people are more used to that. So again, I'm going to pause. Questions?
Question, really just a comment. It seems to me, Director Todd, that option C just seems neater and cleaner. As much as I would like the public to participate in a utility tax vote, they in effect really do by voting down our initial proposal for annexation. So that's up to us to have that discussion with the public. So I think for those reasons, I think option C, and this isn't a bypass. I'm a believer in having the public decide increases like this, or especially new taxes, but they will in effect, like I said, be deciding that if they vote against annexation. So I support C, and I thank you so much for the detail. You really, for lack of a better term, dumbed it down for me. Thank you.
Yeah, so I put all three of them here so you can kind of compare them. I think it's a good time to talk about it, but I think you're right, Councilmember Cavallari, in the process of communicating about what the voters would be accomplishing by voting for annexation, there is always a side if it doesn't pass, what happens. And so I think the choice for you as a council is to tell the voters what would happen. You could leave it open, but I think communication people would say it makes more sense to kind of give them an indication. So that's one of the things I think that it'd be good if council could decide between now and February 8th, again, a very short time frame. But if you had an inkling of A, B, or C, it would help the communication of what the consequences would be of voting for annexation or not.
Councilmember Steckler.
Based on these three, and I actually agree with Councilman Cavallari, our initial goal is to go to the voters, explain what's happened, ask them to support an annexation. This is the reality of our life today. This is what it's going to take to afford a fire department. This is what it's going to take. And it's going to cost X per $100,000, $1,000, $100,000 valuation on your home. I'm optimistic and hopeful that the citizens will say, okay, this is the reality. This is what it's going to take. We're going to vote for it because we want a fire department. We want to have fire protection. Hopefully that's the reality. If it's not, then they say, no, we don't want to pay that. Well, then it falls back on us to make a decision to make sure that we have a fire department. And at that point, the one thing that's in our control is the utility tax. And rather than going back to vote and back to vote and back to vote and back to vote and back to vote, that concerns me. I think the citizens have made a choice. Then at that point, we say, okay, well, we have to implement a utility tax to make sure this is covered. But I'm optimistic that I think our citizens are going to look at this and say, well, here's the information. Here's what it costs now. There's no cheaper way to go. Do you want a fire department or not? And this is what your cost is going to be. I mean, they're looking at some very expensive levies right now that are coming out. They're looking at other costs. I think I'm hopeful that they will see the value of this and what we've done in the research we put into it. But I would support, if you need an answer today, one council member, I agree with Councilman Cavalieri, I would support C.
Yeah, it's kind of like asking which finger do you want to cut
Yeah.
off?
Yeah.
And there's no good choice. I guess option C is like cutting off your pinky rather than your thumb or your forefinger. So if I had to pick, but in the spirit of informing the voters, I think it's important every time we have this discussion, we remind them if vote no on annexation does not get to cheaper fire service. There is no answer that gets us to cheaper fire service. It's a question of who do you want to pay the taxes to the fire district or to the city? And the analysis that we got over the last number of months was that in the long run, annexing to South County will actually save the voters money, even with the increase relative to the increased costs that we'll be paying. So, I don't like to have to discuss, as we said, these options because I'm cautiously optimistic that we'll inform the voters of the benefits of annexing to South County. But I think we need to always remind them of that. There is no option that gets us to cheaper fire service. Other comments, questions?
I'll flip forward to this slide. I'm reminding, this is again, the things that you thought were important when we were talking about the budget plan. So I've reproduced these here and stricken out the recognizing the short time frame is no longer the case. But I think these same basic principles and policy goals are important. Conservative approach, maintain quality, simplicity and clarity, minimize uncertainty. I don't know if there's others, but are there other factors? And then with that thought, are there pros and cons or implications? If you want to discuss it, I would approach it in this fashion. I don't know if we need to do that, or if just you can say, okay, between A, B, and C, it's clear. But those are the factors. And we don't need a decision tonight, but I'm going to propose that by next week, February 1st, we're going to be talking about the annexation overall and invited more of the public to come down and talk to us. It would be beneficial if we could finish this discussion and have you guys feel good about option C is the way to go, or B, or something else. There's other options. I just tried to simplify it by giving you the three that made the most sense to me to kind of spell out the 2 taxes, 2 votes, 2 taxes, 1 vote, 1 back, 1 vote, 1 tax.
I made a great point. I mean, if the voters were hopefully not, but if they did vote down the annexation, I think we need to go the option that has to go back to voters the least. And option C, the EMS levy has historically been supported by the council and by the city because it's dedicated to that purpose. It doesn't just go into the general fund and become available for us to use for something else. And so it reduces the likelihood of us having to dip into the reserves or the ARPA funds, which I think we're hoping over the course of the year, we can identify some strategic ways to use that for the long-term benefit of the city. So I guess I'd vote to cut off my pinky.
At the 3 options, I too think that C is the simplest, right? It's the most straightforward, it's easy to understand, and we wouldn't be going back to the voters 5 times with 5 different requests. It just seems like the most straightforward way to approach it.
Yeah, I agree. We're going to have to pay for the fire service. So if the annexation doesn't pass, we have to pay for it. We have to have fire service. It's not an option. And so I think option C is the only way to guarantee that we continue with fire service. So I kind of agree with Councilman Cavalieri. If everyone votes against annexation, then they are voting that this is how they want us to handle it because they want their fire service. So I agree.
Councilmember Duque.
I think it's difficult for me to look at option C. I hear what you guys are saying, and I'm internalizing it for me. I want to say that I would prefer to go with option B because it was the 1 tax, 1 vote. That was where before the presentation when I was reviewing this part of our council meeting yesterday. I do think it's helpful with option C if it says in that pro or con in the language that we're using for voters that they see that the word utility tax as, you know, why you need to go, because we're going to have to find money. If I could have recorded your voice to like what you said, Mayor Holtzclaw, that part, I would just replay that over and over again if we could like make that a soundbite. But it's really hard for me to think about option C because we are only giving them February and then March, April to know about this. And while we like to think people are tuning into city council meetings and maybe reading newspapers and see, they're not. And so I feel like there's an element of having them to have to go back, even though I don't want to pay for all that extra, like going back, there is an element of them having to see it repeated on that this is the plan, that there's multiple times that we have to go back to you. And then maybe next year would be if the annexation falls, then it's like, okay, utility tax now has to happen. There's something there. I'm not very clear and I'm sorry that I'm not focused. If option C is what everyone wants to go with, I understand I'm in the minority, but that's where my thinking is. Thank you.
Mike, one thing I think has only been touched on in months past. What is the cost to the city when we have to go to the voters with a ballot?
You know, we've been asking elections for that number and they're reluctant to give us a real number because you often end up splitting with other people. So unless Laurel jumps in and tells me she got a phone call today, what's happening is that all the elections people are very focused on the election that's running right now. And so there's no guide. There's normally a guide for elections. It's supposed to be out in February. It's not out yet. So we're short that number. I think it's on the order of $20,000.
So
Something like that.
Remind me with these dang screens. I got new glasses. I can't see the plexiglass. The two votes. So when would those votes be? And they said, I'm sorry, August and November. So those would be a primary and a general election. So it'd be different from the ballot that's going out for early February, the special purpose district, and what we'd be on in April, where it's probably a higher cost because it's just the special purpose districts.
Yeah, that's the pure election cost. Now, the other thing that we're also going to bear for this election coming up in in April, we're going to pay our communication firm, which we're legally allowed to do, is to send one mailer, one factual, objective piece of information to every voter. So that's that mailing that gets you. That's part of it. And I think it's 11 or 13,000 voters or something like that. Some of you may know better. And it's something like that. And figure, boy, the cheapest would be about $1.50 per household to make that mailing, because you got to print the piece and you also got to pay the post office for it. So that you'd probably do that again in August or November to get your information out there, or you could depend on the voters pamphlet. In all cases, you get a voters pamphlet. County elections includes a voter pamphlet. That's new this year. You have to send a voters pamphlet. It was optional in 2021. That's something new in 2022. That's to our advantage anyway. So you have the pro and con statements, the ballot title, and those things will appear in people's hands. In this case, in April, in one mailing, you'll get a pamphlet and the ballot all together. So people have that stuff together. But it's the cost that we choose to market and explain to people. So yeah, it runs cost. It's mostly I think a lot of it for me is the uncertainty. It's money, it's serious money, but it's the uncertainty of having to do it and think about all of the time we spend on this instead of other issues when you're trying to wrestle with it. So getting this done is to everybody's advantage, for the voters and for staff and for the council. Timeline. So proposal for next week, we're going to try to get all of those resolutions lined up for you to take a look at. We've talked about these before. Grant ran through them. There's no surprises there. But we and the fire district also need to accept that RFA plan, the pre-annexation agreement, and that short-term service contract. So we will look at those in a draft form, both the resolutions and the contracts next week. So expect a big packet that's going to have those things in front of you. Ideally, you settle on a budget plan. So you say, we like option 3. We're confirmed with option 3. We're going to go with that. And a reiteration of this discussion tonight, as much as you need to talk about what happens in the taxing plan if the annexation is not approved. Treat that all as draft. That night, we would also probably have enough information out to the public to say who in the public like to be on the pro committee and who'd like to be on the con committee. So we'll put out a notice to the public that they can send in their names and give you an opportunity to look at those names and pick those committees. Remember, you can pick up to 3 on each committee. Then February 8th, kind of replay the same stuff, but this time expecting action for those same things, RFA plan, annexation agreement, short-term contract, and establish that plan. Grant Deginger's proposal would be a resolution that said the city council commits to do this with the taxes with respect to the budget for annexation. So people know what they're voting for and they know they're going to get that 88 cents back for if that's what you decide to do. After the February 8th, then we can sending out that FAQ information that voters will be updated on and posted on our website. And on 22nd, you would take final action on actually approving the annexation measure to go to the ballot. Because now you've got the agreements in place. So you'd say, let's put it on the ballot. You'd agree on the ballot title. You'd approve that explanatory statement. I think it's 100 words. Can't remember if it's 100 or 200 words. So we'll look into that. We'd appoint the members to the pro and con committee. They only have a couple of weeks once you appoint them to put their words together to go into that voters pamphlet. And we'd also probably start authorizing the city manager to exercise Station 76 purchase options, either through annexation or through a service contract. We need a fire station for South County Fire to start providing our services. So we need to get that started. There's a 120-day requirement for us to notify Surfer we're going to buy it. I mean, we've been talking about it, but you would give formal authority to the city manager to start that process. And that's pretty much laid out. But this is the typical title report, inspections, agreements on various things. Just a reminder, the reason why the 22nd is important, it's the February 25th, that Friday is the deadline to get it on the county elections. If you miss that, you're going clear till August and it's too late. After that date, that's a chance to really make that objective information about the election and impacts that's going to go out. So we'd update our FAQ on our website, and that's when the mailing would be going out, probably timed appropriately for when the ballots are going to be out there. I don't have the ballot date here, but we would time that information so people could have a chance to ask questions, research the information on the website, come down and talk to you, ask questions, those kinds of things. And remember, after you have put this on the ballot, so after February 22nd, you have the option, as Grant described to you last week, you as a council could say, let's take up the measure. Would we like to endorse this? We would like to say council agrees, or council agrees 4-3, or council cares not to take an action, but you have an opportunity, and that gives you a little bit more liberty in the things that you can say when people ask questions. You can say, I personally believe this, but also the council took an action and voted 6-2, 6-1 to do this, or unanimously, or whatever it would be. It gives you another vehicle for communication. Final slide there. Oh, there's it. It's ballots in the mail about April 7th. That goes with the voters pamphlet, and then the special election be on the 26th. If we go beyond that, we're not successful, then before May 13th, remember, we've got to decide on that safety net contract and the payment options to head to either or both of the August or November elections. We need to purchase a station regardless of what we're doing, close it no longer than August 1st, because if it annexes, South County Fire is responsible for providing services as of August 1st, so they need the station. But even under contract, we need to have possession of that station. And then overall, we're going to support both South County Fire and Surfer. They're already talking about the transition. Through this whole thing, everybody's always been talking about preserving jobs for those firefighters. Nobody's going to lose jobs. This is a matter of who gets the paycheck. But I've been told, and it's a labor matter, but I've been told they're going to remain whole throughout this. That's not what this is about. It's definitely nothing to do along that line. It's really who needs the firemen and the drivers and the paramedics that provide the service. And so the two of them have already started to talk about that. And then remember, your final thing you do in 2022 is that's when you set the tax levies. You will have a third authority from these elections to set the tax levies, but it's up to you in November to say, okay, this is how much money we need to collect for general or for EMS or for both. This year, they are committed to provide service through the end of December of this year, 2022. If the voters pass the annexation, it becomes effective August 1st. in August so that the county has the authority and the timeline to start collecting taxes for South County Fire instead of collecting taxes for us in 2023. So there's this funny overlap period where Surfer will be responsible for providing service, and they might wait till the last day of the year to move out. They could do that. But the two fire agencies have been talking about it. If it's convenient for Surfer to say, would you, South County Fire, please continue and finish the year for us? And we'll just trade the money. Mill Creek.
At our
South County
contract
Fire.
rate.
Yeah, contract rate. So that's part of this short-term contract covers that eventuality from August 1 through until we're done with the contract. And it's a little bit confusing. It's confused me several times, but that it's variable because how the two agencies care to pass the baton between the two of them makes it a little hard to know exactly what's going on, but the net effect to our taxpayers, net effect to the service receivers is they get services. Somebody's going to show up. The price to us is the same. It really is a matter of when they care to transfer labor contracts, who's going to wash the windows, who's going to, which truck is going to arrive first. We're still paying the same amount either way. No, because there's no authority to collect those until January 1 of 2023. Good question. Right, yeah. So citizens will start paying the new tax rate January 1 of 2023.
The service, not the taxes.
Service, not the taxes. That's a good way to put it. Yeah. Yeah,
Mike-
and they've all agreed to make the money the same.
Do we know why it is that for the fire districts, we have to notify the assessor by August 1st of what the rate's going to be starting January 1st, but for our general property tax levy, we don't have to notify them till the end of November?
Okay, so I probably said something wrong. Maybe Grant could bail me out, or we'll get Karen to answer a bit better next week.
Okay.
You're right. We, as a city, set the rate by the last day of November, so
Correct.
they could set it up. I think this is when you set up a new taxing authority relationship. It has to happen earlier, but I could be wrong too.
Okay.
Grant, are you on there? Do you know?
Yeah, that is correct, Director Todd. You're transferring the authority to collect the taxes from the city to the regional fire authority, and also the boundaries of the RFA are being changed to reflect that the city of Mill Creek will now be in the RFA boundaries. So there's some additional work that needs to be done by the county to prepare for those changes.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You think about, there's the boundary change. They got to decide, does Brian Holtzclaw, is he in the city of Mill Creek or is he in the RFA? So I can see that part of setting it up takes more time, as opposed to once you're in a taxing authority, then it's just how much. That makes sense. Thank you, Grant. Other questions?
Any other questions? First of two study sessions, we are finally going to have the presentation on the recommendations from the Mill Creek Boulevard study area. Worked for the last couple of years. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Rogers.
Sudbury plan started in 2019, but COVID got in the middle of it. So it's kind of drug out longer than we thought it would. We're going to try to do tonight is give you an update of where we are right now. And talk about the recommendations that the Project Advisory Committee has made and transmitted to it in the document that's in your packet. Mandy Roberts is here from OTAC, sitting there. And so she's been with us the whole way on this thing. I believe we also have a couple members of the advisory committee are actually sitting here at the dais. We've got Mayor Pro Tem Bignell and Mayor Holtzclaw. And then I think on the phone, or at least on the Zoom, we also have Tim Panos, who's a property owner in the city, and Matthew Nolan, who is our chair of our planning commission.
David Hamilton, I think, is on the call as well.
Okay, David said he might have a conflict, but I'm glad he's here. He's also on the planning commission and the design board. So we're going to try to do is go over the status of where we are. We're going to talk about accepting the document from the planning or the project advisory committee. And we're going to talk about next steps, like where do we want to go from here? It's important that we are not making any decisions tonight. We are not considering rezones tonight. There's no action that you take tonight that would change anything about what the rules would be or what colors are going to go on the map. Let's see here. So this is our order of our agenda for how we're going to present tonight. I'm going to present the beginning, sort of the introduction in a few slides. Mandy's going to be taking care of most of the presentation. She's going to talk about the recommendations themselves and the summary of the information that the advisory committee looked at, and some of the potential benefits to the city if some sort of change happened in this area. And then I'll close with the next steps portion of the presentation. And the stormwater system in this area is poor. All the water goes directly out of the parking lots and right into the creek. Areas that are maybe struggling a little bit more, not as efficient as the other properties in the city. And then there's just overall economic development for the city as a whole. I mean, we're always looking at trying to keep the tax rates down, services high. How do we keep generating a healthy amount of revenues to keep providing services as a city? So at this point in 2019 or 2018, actually before the budget for 2019 and 20 was done, the council directed staff to take a proactive approach to consider what should or could happen in the future in this area, is to explore possibilities. And that's the purpose of the study and what we're presenting tonight. This pretty much says the same thing, to evaluate economic development, land use opportunities in the sub area surrounding Mill Creek Boulevard and south of town center. Again, this plan, once it's done, will not change the zoning. There's no action tonight. Once the plan is done, it will basically be like an application that the Planning Commission and City Council will consider as part of the 2024 Comprehensive Plan update. That plan is due to be adopted by June 30th of 2024. We anticipate staff actually start working actively with the Planning Commission and with updates to the City Council probably as soon as this October. And that's when sort of the discussion would happen. I will have it in my next steps slide. I have a thing of the comprehensive plan process as well to show you how that sort of dovetails into that. Things that the planning or the project advisory committee looked at was we wanted to talk to the public, community owners, the rights of the property owners. And so we involved them in the process. We also looked at economic and population growth trends in the region. We've got green line that already runs up and down from Bothell to Boeing. And we also have an orange line coming in that's going to be done by 2024 to connect to the light rail that's going to be terminating at least temporarily in Linwood. So we're going to have a lot of bus rapid transit directly in and out of this area. Potential, like what is the threshold? What could be supported in this area? Again, we looked at the infrastructure improvements that are required. And it's important to look at the, going back to the timing, I should have mentioned this, is that the reason that that's so important is that you don't want to repave the road, change all the intersection improvements, and then decide 5 years ago you want to have a different land use, so the road should be narrower. And maybe you have to move all your storm grates, or be repairing storm pipes as well. Consultants do a lot of analysis on existing conditions and market demands and what could be built there. What would it take to have something happen if you wanted it to? Am I just not close enough?
Kicked out and having to be readmitted. Saw several people have to leave the meeting and come back in.
Testing 1, 2, can you hear?
We can hear you now, yes.
We did visioning work sessions with the Planning Advisory Committee, looking at different scenarios, not only what kind of uses could go there, but also like what percent of the area should or possibly be studied to have changes in. The PAC came up with a list of a direction with their various recommendations, which we're going to go over tonight. Our project advisory committee, we started in 2019 and we just ended last September. So they all weren't there for the whole process, but most of them hung in there to the end. But we're very grateful for the work that they did. They hung in there and they spent a lot of time on this project. And a couple of them are here tonight. We did the market assessment, which involved Leland Consulting to do a lot of study about what's going on around us, town center type things around us, value of property, what it takes to construct. We looked at different scenarios. We did visioning with the group. You'll see some of the visioning we did and sort of what the project could potentially look like in this presentation. And then we talked about how much of the area should be subject to change. So there's a recommendation about that. And then we're at the point now where we're giving the recommendations to the city council. There in case you have questions, although if I have to respond, I'll have to run over to a microphone, or maybe I'll take the microphone off the DS. Okay, I'll do that.
Hello, everyone. It's really an honor to be with you tonight, council members, here in person. It has been a long time since I did an in-person presentation as well. I know Tom said that. And I'm also really pleased to be entrusted to present the Project Advisory Committee's recommendations to you tonight. So we're going to go through those in a summary form towards the end of this presentation. Let's see, just want to make sure I know how to switch slides. Sorry. There we go. Thank you. So this is just basically our work plan with the project advisory committee and the time frame that Tom mentioned. We had several meetings with that group. Some of those focused on more stormwater management, infrastructure planning. Some were more looking at the market assessment results and what we found there. And then ultimately we got to discussions about visualizing different scenarios of what could potentially occur in the sub area and looking at different levels of redevelopment, to the point of really wrapping all that work up last fall and being ready to come to be with you tonight. And then as Tom mentioned, we had a lot of input in the project. I hearken back to the days in 2019 when we actually had, public meetings in person, and we rolled up our sleeves around this table, and we went to the senior center and we went to other places, and we got, input from a lot of different folks. And it was really fun. So I hope we, at some point in the future, can get back to gathering that kind of in-person input on projects. But these are some of the things that we heard as common themes coming out of those interactions and workshops we had with folks. Kind of the bolder words that you see here are those that were mentioned most often or seen as most important when we polled participants. So thriving businesses right up there at the top, of course. And given the nature of this sub area, where it's a place where there are a lot of civic activities, city hall campus, that kind of thing, having places for events and festivals ongoing here was really important to folks as well. And the idea of placemaking also ranked very high. Parks and green spaces, strong civic core. I think a lot of people were really excited about the idea that the North Creek Trail comes through this area. There's an open space zone or open space corridor, and there's really an opportunity to enhance that for the community as part of redevelopment. And I'll show you some examples of how that could be done in our scenarios in a moment. So the next thing I want to talk to you about is just the context of the study area. And as Tom mentioned, a lot of thinking went into the bus rapid transit lines that have started in operation and that will start in operation. So the green line and ultimately the orange line as well will be in operation in proximity to this area. On the left side of the screen, you see that kind of light green color really represents the full area that we studied. And as I mentioned, you can see where it's just directly adjacent to North Creek, and then west of Mill Creek Boulevard, south of Town Center, and includes the area north of 164th, but also the commercial district to the south of that area. Maps oriented in two different directions in this presentation. So I just want to make sure that that is clear, because we will be going back and forth a little bit. So in some maps, like the one on the left, we're orienting north to the top. And then we have a few maps where we're orienting north to the right, just because it worked out better formatting wise. But the map on the left just shows you some of the existing uses that are in the sub area. Places like the post office, that was kind of an interesting thing to think about. What's going to happen with post office uses, over the next 20 to 30 years, which is our planning horizon, right? So it was just kind of an interesting area, because some of the buildings are very active, some of the businesses are very active and in use, but others are kind of less active and more poised for redevelopment potential. Somewhere midway through the process, we came to City Council and we suggested 3 potential scenarios to be studied. And the council directed the Project Advisory Committee to look at these 3 alternatives, which would include A, no changes to zoning, which is kind of your baseline alternative, and B, what if a third of the area, or basically 34% of the area, changed in zoning? And then alternative C, what if 50% of the sub area were to change? And this was really driven by the idea that, we're working within a 20-year horizon of potential change, maybe more than that, and what's realistic, what can really happen within that time frame. No one really felt like 100% level of change was really realistic or viable given the uses that are there now. So really dropping back to analyze 34%, 50%, or no change. And so based on once we went through the analysis, based on the market and relationship to the trail and the desired scale for the community, we ultimately, with the project advisory committee, decided to recommend the 34% area of change. And I'll show you what that looks like in a minute on a map. So rather than the 50% area. And that had a lot to do with the location of that area being in the North Creek, along the North Creek corridor and to the west of Mill Creek Boulevard. So again, this is the entire study area of 67 acres. And the project advisory committee, is recommending consideration of change in that longer term comprehensive plan zoning amendment process that Tom mentioned of this area outlined in orange, which represents about 34% of the study area. And again, there was a lot of interest in this area. It's where City Hall is. It's where the Department of Fish and Wildlife building was. It's also, let's see if I can show with my cursor. This is a city pond, city-owned pond that has stormwater functions that could be really enhanced as a public space. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, the connectivity to the North Creek Trail along the back here and opening that up to the community as an asset for recreation and natural resources was viewed as a positive thing. So what we wanted to do with the project advisory committee helping to guide this is really look at if we did make some change in that 34% area, what could it look like? And what's the appropriate scale of development to consider there? So as Tom mentioned, we had some very knowledgeable and experienced economists and market analysts on our team from Leland Consulting Group. And they completed a very thorough analysis of what the redevelopment potential would be here in Mill Creek, looking at these property conditions and the market here. And they also looked at regional examples of redevelopment that's occurred within the last 10 to 15 years and is underway right now, such as the Woodinville Schoolhouse District project. And so when I say regional examples, I'm not talking about Seattle. I'm talking about other examples in Snohomish County, South Snohomish County, other examples in Mill Creek, the Woodinville example, and that kind of thing that make the most sense. And basically what their analysis showed is that for there to be enough return on investment for property owners in this area, you would really need to rezone to 6 to 7 stories of redevelopment potential. Otherwise, there just really wouldn't be enough incentive or return on investment for people to redevelop their properties to other uses here. And that's basically based on their economic analysis of this area. And so that with that in mind, we wanted to show, okay, what would that look like? And what would be some of the design parameters associated with that? So we chose 3 parcels in the sub area to do a visioning exercise. And we just want to emphasize this is hypothetical. It's conceptual. It's not a proposal. It's not anything that, is anticipated to happen at any point in the near future or anything. It's just, this is, if we were going to rezone this area, this 34% area, and allow 6 to 7 stories of mixed use, what could that look like? So looking at these 3 parcels, and I'm going to switch back to north is up in this view, we put together a site plan that's based on other buildings, mixed use buildings that have been designed and developed on properties of this size. And you can see here that the orange kind of yellow orange color represents the existing buildings that are there now. And the green color represents new buildings. And then of course, those buildings would be taller than the buildings that are there now in this scenario. At 5 levels of residential use over a ground floor of commercial or active use, and public plazas, open space areas, streetscape improvements associated with that, as well as enhancements to the public property around the pond area. And then we also looked at the potential for a bonus height level. So in addition to the 5 levels over 1 ground floor, the idea of a 6th level of multifamily use or mixed use that could step back. And one of the reasons why we looked at this and it's recommended to be considered is that this gives the opportunity to incentivize amenity space for developers. And it's a tool that's being used a lot in other cities in the region to add a bonus height, and then have design standards that help to indicate what that could look like, how it should step back, that kind of thing. And with that additional density or height, developers then would be required to provide public amenity space. So plaza space or additional improvements around the pond, that kind of thing, and that could be implemented through a development agreement or other type of tool in the future. So what we have are some visioning illustrations, 9 different visioning shots that I'm going to show you from north to south, and that's what these numbers represent here. So just take a little walk with me as we go from north to south. So this is showing, again, that 5 levels of residential over active commercial use space. And then you can see up at the top, there's a potential for a 6th level bonus height, but also you see, hey, there could be roof garden overlook space up at the top. And the character along Mill Creek Boulevard is meant to really replicate what you see in town center a lot, where there's a variation in setback between the edge of the street and buildings. And that creates kind of these nooks and crannies where people can gather, cafe spaces and things like that. We heard a lot from the community that they love that aspect of town center, and they'd like to see that continued through this area. I'm going to quickly go through this now, because we want to get to the project advisory committee points of recommendations. So this is just kind of giving you, we like to show these human scale illustrations to give you a sense of how that development could look along Mill Creek Boulevard. There would be opportunities, of course, with more residents and people living here, there would be opportunities for additional retail uses. And those customers would also frequent existing restaurants and grocery stores and whatnot in the sub area and in town center. And now as we get kind of to the south end of the project, this is where you can see the idea of how do we enhance that pond area and make a better connection to the North Creek Trail. So just an illustration that kind of shows how you might do that. This is not, since it's a man-made pond, there's an opportunity to create a boardwalk over the top, have some overlook space, and then ultimately to connect to the North Creek Trail corridor. And so we do have a little video that I want to show you. Joe's going to help rev that up. Thank you. commercial frontage. And then we also have on-street parking. I'll show you that momentarily. More illustrations. We did do some conceptual cross sections of how Mill Creek Boulevard could be improved with redevelopment. And the key is really flexibility in the street section to have parking on both sides, and maybe in some sections parking on one side. And then we have one section that shows parking, no parking along the street, just to kind of give a sense of what that would look like. One of the things we heard very loud and clear from the Project Advisory Committee and from the public is a strong interest in having this corridor function for local use, local access, business purposes, and not function as a cut through between the two highway corridors. So that's something that you'll see that's part of the Project Advisory Committee recommendations. So here's an example of Mill Creek Boulevard with parking on both sides of the street, sidewalks on both sides. Now, as you know, there are sections that don't have sidewalks on both sides, so this would be an enhancement. And then on the west side, an opportunity to expand the public space near the building frontages, like is done in Town Center. And then as we move further to the south, there's an opportunity to have more interaction with the pond and public space and have features there that kind of extend from the streetscape. So there was a lot of analysis done as part of this work. And remember, we are in the center column as far as our recommendation of alternative B, which is about 34% of the sub area. And that would result in, approximately 1,200 to 1,500 dwelling units and quite a lot of additional square footage of commercial space for different commercial functions. I won't read all of this to you because we want to try to get through this quickly so we can have discussion. I know it was in your packet, but I think just note that there was a very thorough look at positive and negative potential effects associated with parks and green spaces, regional stormwater management considerations, enhancing the civic core, and a lot of those principles that we heard from the community that were really important to them as part of outcomes for this project. We looked at traffic and transportation considerations, trips that would be generated. And then ultimately, we also looked at potential revenues that would be associated with this redevelopment. This is an estimate over the estimated 25 years of what it would take to implement just that 34 acres of redevelopment. And it's a bit conservative because it's based on existing property values, but it shows you that, there would be some impact fee revenues that would occur with redevelopment. There would be periodic revenues or one-time revenues such as real estate excise tax that occurs when properties are sold. And then there would be, repeated year upon year revenues from property and sales tax that would occur at a higher level under redevelopment than what occurs today. And just to kind of show you some analysis that the city had done actually in 2014 of how property tax generated by land use looks across the city. One of the things that really stood out in this analysis is town center and the Miravita project, for example, when it's mixed use versus multifamily alone. Or excuse me, when it's mixed use with multifamily, there are greater levels of revenue generated than if it's just single use or commercial use only. And the city took another look at that in 2020 while we were working on this project, and in particular looked at the Miravita project in town center versus 3-story office and an existing parcel in the Mill Creek Boulevard subarea. So you can just see that we have the data to verify that there would be more property tax generated from that type of redevelopment. Okay, so quick summary with this redevelopment in the 34% area, there would be more residents, more customers to support the businesses in the area. We would see, opportunities for different types of housing to support the community. We would really want to encourage more places for people and amenities with how this is zoned and how development standards are put together for the project. There would be an opportunity to upgrade the stormwater management system, which is really antiquated and in need of improvement for water quality. We could improve the pedestrian friendly character of the area, which would help to extend that look and feel of town center to the south, as well as to help connect people to the bus rapid transit stations. And then by focusing redevelopment here, there's an opportunity to really protect single family neighborhoods that surround the area, not have the pressure of population growth in those areas. So I'm going to very quickly just do a quick run through of the 10 points that the Project Advisory Committee is recommending for this area. First of all, continuing to engage stakeholders, the public, property owners, businesses, as this moves forward towards the comp plan update. Allow a mix of uses for redevelopment. And I think part of this too has to do with really having flexibility to respond to market demand over time. So if it's just zoned for a single type of use, that's not very flexible to respond to market demand. So allowing mixed use is important. Allowing additional building height, as I discussed earlier, is another point of recommendation. Providing illustrative development and design standards to really get the character and the look that is consistent with Mill Creek being, an attractive, livable place. Need to have great illustrative design standards for that. Making sure that public spaces and amenities are required as part of redevelopment, enhancing the public realm, the North Creek Trail corridor, and open spaces. Requiring that the streetscape in the suburb be designed to support safe movement of pedestrians, bicycles, and autos. So not just an auto focus, but also ped bikes. And I think that's really key too, because of the proximity of the North Creek Trail and its use by pedestrians and bicyclists. And then, as I mentioned, the idea that Mill Creek Boulevard would be designed to function to serve the properties in the sub area and not be a cut through. That really helps to support the local economy and keeps the scale and use of that street in character with the desired result in town center, as well as this sub area to the south of town center. And then proactively seeking public improvement partnerships to make streetscape improvements. And that could be leveraging grant opportunities, infrastructure funding opportunities, making sure that we're looking for those as you go along, and that could help to incentivize or catalyze development activity in the sub area. And that also is the same for stormwater management. There are grants available to retrofit suburban areas with regional and sub-regional stormwater facilities. And so that could be something to consider that would also help to catalyze change in this area. And then lastly, just to evaluate the land uses desired in the corridor as part of the long-term planning, making sure that we're promoting the desired form of redevelopment and eliminating potential undesired uses in this area. Things like, for example, storage units may not be a desirable use for this area. So just making sure that that's not on the table. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Tom to cover next steps.
That's been presented tonight by the Project Advisory Committee to prepare what's a final kind of a draft plan, something that would be considered as we go through our comprehensive plan amendment. That's important for the deliverables of what Mandy has been tasked to do, but it's also important for a grant that we received from the state of Washington from the Department of Commerce. If you recall, we were already well into the project, but we applied for a grant from Department of Ecology that in essence reimburses the city 100% for the work that we've done. We are already into it about $200,000, and we've already been reimbursed more than that, or that amount from the state. So if we, to get the next approximately $100,000 when the project is done, then we'll need to come up with a final product or the deliverable. And if we don't, then what would happen is we wouldn't get that, and we'd also have to give back what we've been reimbursed so far, because that's part of the grant. Be a formal proposal that would be part of the comprehensive plan update. I've got a slide here. My last slide, I promise, after this one, is sort of goes what that process is. And that's the 2024 comprehensive plan update process. And I'll just be pretty quick with that. That involves the Planning Commission, involves the City Council, involves the public at large, public hearings, involves the various boards in the city as well, Parks and Rec, Arts and Beautification. And then even once all that's done, we do an environmental analysis on that as well. So of Word Microsoft Word, not very technical, but it's in our comp plan. It's in our adopted 2015 plan. In the area that we're this update that's coming up, we have to do it. It's mandatory due in 2024 is this periodic update. And then once you do that, there's a whole bunch of steps you go through, including picking out, looking at your goals, what you want to accomplish, looking at what your existing conditions are, go through issues, plan elements. And so all these areas will be involved in this plan as well as other things. We've got to look at, I was going to bring in the comp plan, and it's about this thick if you print it out on paper. And we're going to have to go through page by page for some of you that were here back in 2015. That's what we did. But we're going to have to do that again. It also involves this is participation, Parks and Rec Board. So that's where that, once this is done, this is where this is going to fit in and be a part of those discussions. So with that, I would like to open it up to questions.
Before we get to questions, because I know there'll be plenty. Thank you, Tom and Mandy, for all your work. This has been a long process, and thank you to all the advisory committee members, a few of which I think are on the call tonight. I see Tim Panos and David Hamilton. And I also want to recognize Director Todd, who for 80% of this process was one of the council representatives on the advisory group. I think there was two pivotal moments for me through this process. I think we got off to a pretty slow start. We were kind of running in the sand. And I think that was partly because we went into this thinking we had to come up with a plan. And I think it took us several meetings to realize that wasn't realistic. And we refocused our goal on coming up with some recommendations that the council consider for going forward. And I think that really freed up the discussion quite a bit. And the other moment was, and some of you have heard me say this in my development day job, I've been to presentations where they talk about with focus groups, they ask people, what do you think of development that's 50 units per acre? God, I don't want to have anything to do with that. And then you show them a picture of a development. What do you think of this? Oh, that's pretty cool. Would you be surprised that that's 80 units per acre? So I think the other pivotal moment that helped us really move forward with the recommendations was when we got the visualizations of what it could look like. And that really, I think, helped us focus our discussions on where, if any place, that type of use would be appropriate. So I'm interested to hear everyone's comments. I'll have more to say as we get into the discussion. But before I get to council questions, I did want to give the opportunity to Tim or David, the advisory group members, an opportunity to say something if they'd like. Tim or David, did you have anything you wanted to add? I can't see you on my.
We got to unmute their mics.
Okay, can you do that?
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you, Tim. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. I mean, I don't really have a lot to add. I think, that was a very thorough process, and I think there was a lot of good, useful input. And, I feel that that's a reasonable direction to accomplish some more density and, enrich the community with some additional opportunities for businesses and residential, attractive residential opportunities. So, thank you for involving us and having a chance to comment and along the way. And I feel like it was a useful process.
David, did you want to say anything? I think do we need to unmute him, or does he need to unmute himself? You need to unmute.
Okay, there, I got
We
it.
can hear you now.
Yeah, okay, good. Hey, no, I want to thank you for allowing me to be a part of this team. I think we accomplished a lot, and Tom and Mandy did a good job directing us. And I just keep thinking about, I live a little bit north of Mill Creek up here. And every time I look at Mill Creek, I tell everybody, Mill Creek Town Center was done right. And the city of Mill Creek has done things right. And so when I had an opportunity to take part in doing more of Mill Creek right, it was a real honor to be able to do this. So hopefully we can forge on with the new comp plan.
David. So with that, let's start with if there's questions, and then let's get into giving everyone an opportunity to say what they want to say about it, and then trying to avoid getting into a lengthy debate because we do have more on the agenda tonight. So Councilmember Allison, do you have a question for staff?
I do. This question is actually for Tom Rogers. I was in a WRIA 8 meeting last week, and I heard about a Lorraine Loomis bill that is going through the House right now. It's in committee, HB 1838. And I'm wondering if city staff has had a chance to look at that, because I realize new laws come into play all the time and areas are grandfathered in, but this one sounds like there may not be allowing grandfathering in, and it would impact how close you could be to the creek. Just wondering, is that on your radar, or is anybody from the city taking a look at that one?
Mike might be there. I know that our city engineer I believe I saw an email path going back and forth, and we're looking into that. Yes.
Okay, great.
Talk to the Department of College early on before we can start.
Yeah. Trying to keep the presentation brief. A couple parts got cut out, on the floor. But one of them is, several years ago, the city worked with the Department of Ecology, our own planning commission, the city council in place at the time, to come up with a regulation that says that if you have a developed property, such as this area, and if you have stormwater facilities that do not meet the current requirements, that if you want to redevelop it, if you can redevelop it using the exact same line of where your impervious surfaces are now, leaving the buffers the same width, as long as you bring everything up to the current code for stormwater. And that's sort of the incentive. There's no reason somebody's going to knock down a building and improve stormwater if they're going to lose 2/3 of their building. So it's a way to sort of incentivize doing that. But it also has a thing or a provision in there that if this buffer there is not of high quality, then they have to improve the buffer. So they're not grandfathered with the buffer they have. They're gonna have to do some mitigation to improve the buffer as well.
Okay, the footprint doesn't change, but the
Yeah, now I
quality
don't know
of the
how that
buffer
relate.
could.
Yeah, I don't know how that would relate to this bill or whether it would.
It's
It's
a
private.
it's a salmon recovery bill, and I think it remains to be seen how it would impact us. We already have, I think it's 300-foot buffers on North Creek under our current regulations. They're pretty extensive buffers, so I'm not sure to what extent it would increase those buffers.
Right, it'll be the equivalent on each side of the creek of the tallest tree that can survive along that creek or
That's
something
essentially
like
how,
that.
that's essentially how the 300-foot buffer was come up with. under
Okay, great.
For, so that's.
And that would be a very big change, right? I hate to dive down a rabbit hole, but we talked to our planning commission at our very last week about revising our wetland buffers. In most cases, they would be reduced to go along with best available science that Department of Ecology is recommending. Our buffers, there's been a lot of science since 2004. And part of the DRCC process made us realize that we were out of date with that. And so we are now looking at sort of revising our buffers to be square with the Department of Ecology recommendations. So I'm not aware that they were going to, hopefully whatever they're going to change with the buffers is with best available science, because that's what the current law is and not arbitrary numbers. So I guess we'll have to look into that.
Yeah, I know the rural areas are really concerned because it will affect every farm owner, you know.
That's where it's going to have the biggest impact if it were adopted.
Yes, okay, good to know that the city code was already up to snuff.
Other questions? Hearing no questions, I would suggest we just go, well, okay, we'll go in the order of lights. So Councilmember Cavallari followed by Councilmember Steck.
Just a quick question. First, thanks to the group that you, even the fellows that you had speak here tonight. I know the meetings you've conducted and all the collaboration during COVID makes it really complicated. So to see this, excuse me, to see this product now is pretty inspiring. Thanks to everybody involved. One of the questions I had then is what I have now is that what is the climate with the current landowners and their willingness to whether it's sell their land or utilize their land for other purposes or reasons around it. I know that was a concern to the group. So has that changed? Has that softened?
Well, we contacted the property owners, gave them an opportunity to come to the meetings. We talked to several on the phone. We didn't have a single property owner that was opposed to the plan. Some said they may or may not do it immediately. There are a lot of, some of the buildings have dentists in them that have a very high per square foot as far as what the leases are. So they're generating a lot of income. So they may be less likely. There's some business buildings along this corridor that are not probably generating that kind of money per square feet. So they may be more likely, but we didn't have any property owner come down and say they didn't want it to happen. I think they would all appreciate an upzone and have opportunities that are presented to them. But it's certainly always going to be up to the property owner is whether or not it's in their financial interest to do so. Even if the comp plan rezone the property, all that does is provide opportunities. It doesn't make anybody do anything. It's basically sets, changes the rules for somebody that would want to do something.
Right, thanks. And that was a concern before, and I know it's been a little bit of time that has lapsed since then. So just wanted to make sure we were still paying attention to those folks. Thank you.
Yeah, Vince, we are very cognizant of that because we didn't want to be perceived as trying to force something upon people. And so I think Tim constantly reminded us of that in the discussions is it wasn't an unwillingness to participate. It's just making everyone aware that the market realities and the leases that are existing on some of those properties are long-term. So the reality is this, if we were even to make some changes or propose some, to allow something to be different in the future, it could be decades before that ever happened just because of the existing contracts and leases that are in place. Councilmember Steckler.
I do have some comments, but first I have one question before we go. I'll wait till we get into the comment section to do that one. But one question, 5 to 6 foot tall developments are pretty frightening thought to a lot of people. And I saw the renderings that were created here. Do you have any actual developments that we could get photographs of, visuals of, that we can see exactly what these look like? I think that would be very good for people to see that the reality of what it looks like, as opposed, because you can always make things look pretty in a rendering. What exactly do these buildings look like when they're finished? when they're full, when they're active. Question was, could we possibly see that?
Yeah, I could certainly make those available. We went through an extensive look at similar projects in the actual vicinity of North King County and Stonehenge County. So I could make those available.
You made that presentation to us in the last 2 years.
I think we made some of those to you as well, but I know that the pack went over that when we
Oh,
talked about that. And then the renderings were, everybody, I've never heard anybody come to the counter in Mill Creek and say, I don't like Maravita. I don't like the way it looks. I think it's too tall. No one's ever said that to me. So we asked OTEC to take Maravita, sort of that kind of architecture, and sort of impose that, put an extra story on it. And then, so that's what that rendering is. That's a very similar, you'll recognize it if you.
Yes, that one though, the interesting part about that one is Maravita in town center, they put it down on the creek and then they put a town center in front of it.
Right.
So you don't see it. What I saw there was a tall building right up to the street that is, relatively close, which is going to take away the gathering area and stuff. The only thing I could think of that's like that is Bothell, downtown Bothell, where they started developing tall buildings like that. And so that's the one that comes to mind for me. And I don't know if there are other ones that might be more attractive that might look more like that. Because when you put those up that close to the street, what does it look like? What kind of retail do you get? That'd be a question is, could we see something like that?
Yeah, I'd be glad to share those.
Okay.
Yeah, and Tom, I might just add on to that. I think what's really critical, and that's why the project advisory committee was recommending design and development standards, illustrative design development standards be developed, is that you don't want those buildings just right up to the street. You want to have, setbacks and appropriate landscaping and trees in the streetscape, similar in layout to what you have in town center, where buildings are pulled back and the sidewalks are wide and generous. So a lot of times when you see that, and even in downtown Bothell, I have to say there's not as generous a landscape and setback as we're showing here, recognizing this is Mill Creek and this is different. And so just wanted to make sure, that was known, that we were trying to kind of achieve a level of excellence here in Mill Creek that represents the character that the community would like to retain. So.
Councilmember Allison?
Well, I don't have a question.
Open floor. Give everyone a chance to make some comments.
Turn my mic on. Okay, so I'm not thrilled about the height of those. I would love to see a list of similar projects so I could go walk around and see if it feels the same way the farm feels, because when you walk around in the farm or in the neighborhood behind the farm, you have this thing over the back of you, and if we cut off the light to the road, I can't visualize it. I need to walk around a space that's similar to it. And then we're only looking at one side of that boulevard. Are we going to eventually do the same thing to the other side? And then we'll have 2 6-story buildings up and down that whole road, and you just lose all sight of the sky when you're walking through that corridor or driving. So those are just the height alone, it bothers me. I'm not opposed to apartments, but we have a lot of apartments in town. Getting more home ownership, condos, or townhomes that people could purchase. I would like to drive in that direction in the future, because we have a lot of apartments per capita. Our region has a lot of apartments per capita. I was in another community meeting last Friday with some new regional leaders, and we looked at some statistics, and the condos and the townhome style dwellings, multifamily, are really lacking. And that's not just our county, that's King, Skagit, Kitsap, it's not just us. So that would be a second comment that I would like to make. And then I realize we haven't done traffic studies right yet. Okay, so, cutting off that boulevard, that's my route home. I live in Juniper, I slip through there, stop off and do a couple of things and then head home. So I know lots of people use it as a pass through, but it's my entrance into my community coming through that section of town. So yeah, would love to see what the traffic studies say, because it didn't take me very long to realize if I was on 164th, I was going to turn on that boulevard, because waiting at that next light is not a fun time. So, you know, just a few comments. Okay, I think that's all for me.
Councilmember Steckler.
Just so comments now. And I start with my reaction. This is a good for the development of land that would be probably very financially beneficial for the city. And, you know, I see the value of that. I see the value of this recommendation clearly. And it would work. The question I go back to is in the earlier presentation, there was a bar chart that had, we went out and we met with people. And we said, what are you looking for on this Mill Creek Boulevard? And there were all these different bar charts of what you were looking for. And one of the smaller ones that had the little print on it was housing. Then there was all these other bar charts that had all these other factors. And so housing was a small factor on what we want to do with Mill Creek Boulevard. And yet now it's become the major factor in what we're going to do and recommend to do with Mill Creek Boulevard. Because as I heard, the developers, and I agree with this, to really maximize their investment, they're going to need 6 to 7 stories or 5 to 6 stories. That's where you can really get a great return. And those same developers are going to invest a lot more in our city if we give them that type of a development. But the question is that the right tool for our city? Is that the right need for our city? And you know, I'm not going to say what it is. I'm just going to say I don't know. I wasn't on the committee. I wasn't into all the research. So I step back and I wonder. I did have a concern of putting that building. I think it's going to come forward because of the setbacks on the creek. It's going to come forward to the street, and that concerns me. And I got to be honest with you, candid. The only thing I could think of in my mind was Bothell. That looked like Bothell. That rendering looked like Bothell. And Bothell got a lot of bad flack for that early development because it was maximized. It was financially incredibly beneficial, but aesthetically a real challenge. And in reality, the amount of traffic and congestion it brought has been a real challenge for them. I know that traffic, one thing I would agree with on a couple of things, traffic patterns are a critical component of what we do going forward. I know all we're looking for today is input, not decisions. I'm also thinking on housing. If we're going to go in this direction, I do think that we need to sit back for a minute. I heard a presentation earlier where we had a big apartment complex almost rented up. So I don't know, maybe apartments are going to rent up right away. I don't have the information to tell you if apartments are a good thing or bad thing. All I know is we do have a housing situation. We don't have a lot of housing in the market. We don't have a lot of land left to develop. So if there was a solution, and another council member mentioned that maybe something for home ownership could become an alternative to what we have right now. You know, we have a lot of people that are looking to downsize. Could we provide them with a condominium solution that is upscale condominium that could be a downsize, allow them to stay in Mill Creek, and then open up housing in Mill Creek for other people? That's kind of a future development solution to the future. I don't know if apartments are the solution, but I do know that we can't buy a house in Mill Creek, and the prices are getting extremely prolific. Along with those traffic patterns, if we did want to consider cutting off Mill Creek Boulevard to 527, that's a huge decision of what would happen to traffic pattern. I do know that I would be extremely concerned about the backup from 527 onto 164th. If Mill Creek Boulevard no longer provided you an ability to get through to 527, then everybody's going to stay on 164th waiting to get up to that 527. I think you'd have a really difficult traffic situation. I'm sure if you did the traffic patterns, you could provide a solution to that. I did also notice in your solution, whatever you do come up with, if there's going to be retail, there needs to be street parking for retail, significant street parking, or your retail is really challenged. And in your renderings, I didn't see a lot of street parking for the retail. And that was a concern, significant concern. When I look at the amount of street parking we have now on this same pathway for, we have I look at the amount of people parked in there right now. If we took that away, I just, and added apartments or some other residential, street parking is going to become a critical component. So I don't have anything negative to say about it. I think it would be a great economic boom for us. I just think I just go back to that bar chart. Is that solving the needs of what we originally commissioned this to do? Sounds to me like we are definitely solving the needs of developers and our city in providing us a really good, significant financial model. And part of that was what I actually heard in the presentation. So that's just feedback. We're not doing a decision today, just feedback. I'm done.
Councilmember Duque.
Thank you. I want to thank everyone who participated in the sub area plan. I remember thinking about submitting an application for when you were looking for people to be a part of it. This is actually something that I've been following along. And I'll be honest, one of the main reasons why I ran for city council last year, following along in the presentations, hearing about it. Also, because I was sitting there when there were discussions about the farm, and I felt that we weren't heard in our questions and our answering. And I remember there was one of the many meetings that I attended when you guys were discussing the farm. And I think it was Councilmember Bond who said, a lot of these decisions when zoning happened way before us. So you're coming now here to talk about it, but it's already been zoned this way. And that's when I really had that understanding of, so we missed a critical moment to talk about what it is that we want, the mission, the goals, the look, all of that kind of thing, because it was the zoning. And then it also then looked into understanding better for myself, because I'm not in this field. This isn't what I do, but understanding once you zone something and there's an owner of that property, there are certain limitations or there's certain requirements we can put in place, but really at the end of the day, it is their property, and they're going to do with it what they will. And so that's my concern with this. I do appreciate the renderings. I think that's really helpful in terms of the brainstorming and thinking through. And I have driven through Bothell. I've driven down, especially in Seattle. You see a lot of these 5 to 6 story units around University of Washington, Green Lake, there's a lot of this. So I've seen it up close. I've been able to walk around it and see what this looks like. And that's why I didn't have any questions, because I really wanted to hear the presentation to see what I was missing from looking at just the slides in the PowerPoint. And I think there was a lot that was added. I have lots of concerns about this project, especially talking to all the residents that I spoke to, and I promise this rant will be over soon. But I just wanted to say that this was something that I talked about. If there was ever a resident that I knocked on the door that would give me just a little bit more of their time, I would talk about this project, I would talk about the DRCC, and then I would talk about the farm, that wetland area, and what does it mean, and just concerns in general. So I feel like I've been listening and hearing to this. So on that note, as part of the commentary, I'm not going to repeat what was said, just really quick. I agree about the cut through of their street. I think eliminating that would be not helpful at all. I think we need to really be considering what does 164th and Bothell Everett Highway already look like, and what that will look like in 10 to 20 years. But I also know how important it is that we have additional housing. So I'm not completely opposed. And I think it actually makes sense if anywhere in Mill Creek, there was a line in the presentation, in the PowerPoint, and that was shared, which is, I think it was protecting single family homes. And that actually stuck with me more when you said it, because I went, if there is if we do need, it's not if we do need more housing, we do need more housing. Where does this fit? And it should never be right next to single family homes. And I think that's part of the issue I had with the farm, that it overlooks. I happen to have friends in that neighborhood that overlook that. And so it's this massive thing. I also happen to be from Southern California and lived in, I saw, you could have your single family home and then right next to you, a 3-story apartment, just a big block. That's just how LA is now. It's, the way it goes. So I say this in that my question is, if we don't like necessarily these considerations, not because it wasn't well thought out, it was really important to do this evaluation. There's not taking away, but if we have additional questions about, well, what, even though the economists don't like, anything other under 5-story, 6-story, can we still look at that? What does that process look like for us to do potential additional studies for that? I know there's cost. I know there's staff time. I don't ever want to take that away, but what does that look like to have more condominiums? What are our options for additional studies to help us inform our comprehensive plan update? And let me just go through my notes really quick. I have many. Buffer was already talked about. Not going to repeat things. Thank you.
Councilmember Cavallari.
Thank you, Mayor. Good comments, everybody. I have to admit, over the last year or two, I've kind of softened on this project a little bit. I didn't hear the hesitancy from citizens or groups like I discussed in the beginning about rezoning the area and really changing the complexion of that region. But as I softened on it and started hearing 5 and 6 stories and thousands of new apartment units, it started to push me in the sour direction again, that is kind of wasn't really the marching orders that we suggested to the group. That it was, I clearly heard when we had this discussion in the very beginning that we understood there may be a need for home ownership and housing and whatnot. Everyone in every conversation we've had up here tonight had to do with Mill Creek's character and Mill Creek's charm. And I think putting high-rise apartments like that really deviates from our mission. And I just don't, again, I did soften on it, and I thought maybe, a mixed use of apartments, condos, townhomes, but it seems like it's really full steam ahead to push in that it's either all or nothing in. And I'm hoping we can engage in a different dialogue where to the 2 council member on the end there, the young lady's comments about what can we do to maybe start the dialogue of condos, townhomes, and home ownership. That was the original discussion for this group. So I'm hopeful that we can revisit this and the idea of simply putting the blinders on and going exactly with what the people do not want is a glut of more apartments down there is, I don't know, I think is a little bit reckless and tone deaf. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor. So I have a question because we have put all this money has went into this study for the group to do. The way I understand this is that this is a starting point. This does not mean the council, this was just the recommendation of this committee, correct? So it's not, council's under no obligation to actually follow through on these recommendations. We could study those and come up with something that we want to do that's less dense, less floors, maybe do some studying of the traffic pattern, because that is really important for people to get through from 164th. I personally really like the idea of enhancing the streetscape, because there are parts of this that I really love, like enhancing the stormwater pond, enhancing to get out to North Creek Trail. We need to do stormwater improvement. So I guess my question to you is, we're at a point where we need to say this is a plan, but is it really it's not really a plan to move forward. It was just a recommendation and then we can still work and tweak it? Or are we going to end up with something that's a plan that ends up trying to end up being the plan? Do you know what I mean? So can we clarify that for everybody that what step this is and that this is just the recommendation from the actual committee and there's still, the council's going to need to tweak this, look at what they like, what they don't like, have more studies, have public hearings and a whole process before we even start discussing what kind of zoning we would do if we were to change anything. Can you elaborate on that for us, Tom?
Sure. So I'll give it a shot. So what we're trying to do here is we're going to create a plan that can be considered as part of the comprehensive plan. So after this meeting, my hope would be that you understand what's in the recommendations, you thank the committee for the work that they have done. We, as staff, would work with the consultant to put together a document that says draft plan on it or whatever it says, but basically it has to be a plan to be the deliverable the state wants to get reimbursed for the grant. But it doesn't mean that it's adopted. It doesn't mean it's changed the zones, but it's a proposal. It'll be like an application that the city council and the planning commission will work on over the next 2 years, along with all the other changes you're going to make to the comprehensive plan. You have to update it. You have to go through page by page. And if we own more acreage, like we own more properties now. So we're going to say now the city owns more properties. We own the church property. We own, so we go through and just make sure that's updated. But there are also some other things that we could consider, and this would be one of them. You may ultimately decide that you don't want housing, and that's something you could choose to do, and that would not become part of your comprehensive plan update. But this is the commitment that we have made to the state, and also as part of our contract with OTAC, is to prepare a proposal that can be considered. So my hope is that I can send some additional information after the fact to the council as a whole, for examples of where you could go, some sort of rendering, some drawings that we've looked at, in case you want to go out and do your own thing. But I hope to work with the consultant to put this plan together and then have the planning commission look at it and the council over the next 2 years. I don't plan on coming back here and rehashing out and wordsmithing the policy or the recommendations that the project advisory committee did. I think it's going to be part of the comprehensive plan proposal that goes through the process. And I had that big chart that goes in a big circle. That's the process that I'm talking about.
9:30, and we're
Second.
all's in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion's extended. Do you have a question, John? Wait, is it a question or a concern? Because I haven't had a chance to speak yet. Everyone else has. So you said you had a question. Okay. I've got several comments. Quoting Yogi Berra, this is like deja vu all over again. We need to clear up a few things. This is just a plan. This is a concept. This isn't blessing any final changes. It's not blessing anything to happen. It's trying to come up with a vision. With all due respect, we spent 2 years doing exactly what this council directed that group to do. We very clearly and very purposely made sure we were narrow in our focus on what our direction was from the council. So it's a little bit frustrating to say that we essentially wasted 2 years of our time not doing what you said we should do. And it's also frustrating hearing things that we have to debate over and over. We have been advised we can't regulate based on home ownership. So we've got to get that issue off the table. We can't dictate whether developers build apartments or condos. It's illegal. We've been advised of that. I've asked staff to pull up that memo that Scott Massal did for us 4 or 5 years ago. We've got to get some of these issues off the table so we don't chase our tail. No one's proposing to cut off access through Mill Creek Boulevard. The issue is, do you design the street to disincentivize it as a pass-through with doing things like putting parking on both sides to make it unattractive for someone who lives in Everett wanting to cut through and go up as opposed to you wanting to go to your neighborhood? No one's proposing to cut off Mill Creek Boulevard and not make it a through street. That's just not even on the table. As to why we put it on the west side, I mean, we had a lot of debate as a group of where to put it. Do we put it in the whole area? Do we allow it in certain areas? Do we allow it on first come, first serve? And we were very cognizant of the community feelings towards multifamily development and what we heard from the council. Ultimately, our recommendation to put it on the west side was because of its proximity to the trail and the creek. We felt as a group that that's where you could put some housing if there's any place to put it and minimize the visual impacts from tall buildings on the rest of the city. So that's why you don't see a recommendation saying put it in 50% or 100% of the area. And the last thing I want to say is we have another reality that hasn't been talked about tonight. Some of you have heard me say this for years. Under the Growth Management Act, we are legally obligated to plan for the population projection that's allocated to us. Our city's census population in 2000, where are my notes here? In 2020 was 20,926 people. The population that has been allocated for us to plan for in 2044 is 24,813 people. That's an increase of 3,887 people. I couldn't find this one number, but we have some existing capacity within our current future land use map. But we have a capacity deficit, I believe it's about 200 or 2,400 people. That means under our current comp plan designations and zoning, we can't accommodate the people that we have to legally plan for. So if we don't consider looking at this area as an option for us to decide whether or not, after we see more detailed plans in a couple of years, whether this is the right area to do that, tell me what our other choices are besides upzoning the single family neighborhoods. Where else do we have vacant land that we're going to be able to accommodate 2,400 more residents? I mean, that's the reality and the legalities we have to deal with. So this is simply a set of recommendations that this group came forward to with the charge to look at what could we do different? How would we, if we wanted to consider putting residential, how would we do that? And putting together a set of recommendations to hopefully give staff direction to move forward and putting forward more details. All the concerns we've had with design, John, you're absolutely right. That was a big issue for the committee. And Vince, we wanted to make sure that the look and feel of Mill Creek is maintained if something more intense was allowed. How that were to be done, that's years down the road, if and when we decide this is something we want to do and we want to update our design regulations. All very valid concerns, but that's at the goal line and we're on the 1 yard line. We got 99 yards to go before we get to those decision-making points. So with that, Councilmember Stickler, you had another question?
Well, yeah, I do kind of feel like you might not be real happy with me if I bring them up though, after that couple comments you made, but I gotta say, I know that you guys put in a lot of time on this and, people are going to have other thoughts, but those thoughts are not reflective of the fact that we disregard what this committee did. These are other thoughts. And I think it's just items that need to be openly discussed and put on the table. And it's not something that should be, I mean, we should always be open to new ideas and open to other thoughts. I mean, I really respect what this committee did and I thank you for your time and thank you all. But, there's just, this solution will solve the need that you just described of 2,400 residents or whatever you're talking about. I get it. I understand. But is that the best use of the land? Maybe there's a better way to solve that problem. Maybe there's we could talk about other solutions to that problem. There are other solutions to it, but that opens up another can of worms we don't want to talk about right now. Right now, we're talking about this piece of land. And I guess when I saw this original mission, I misunderstood what I saw in writing as to what we were supposed to do with Mill Creek Boulevard. I thought it was to redesign this gateway to our community, this entrance to our city, to take a look at a way to make it more attractive, to make it more of an open community. A lot of the things that was talked about at the beginning of this presentation today, and to offer more open spaces for events and activities. And And quite honestly, I mean, I've looked at, we brought up we brought up Woodinville as an example. I was just over in Woodinville last week. I had a business lunch at their restaurant, the Rusty Pelican, their version of Rusty Pelican. So I saw their recent redevelopment. It's a 3-story project. It's beautiful. I mean, their city it's gorgeous. It's a lot of open spaces, forums, fountains. It's really quite attractive. A lot of apartments, but aesthetically quite pleasing. I mean, it's just a different way to look at it rather than going up 5 or 6 stories. 5 or 6 stories is, gosh, financially very, it sounds like we're serving the master of the developer as opposed to the master of the city with that decision. That's my concern. I'm just gonna say that. So, yeah, I think there are other, I'd like to, if the purpose here of Mill Creek Boulevard is to solve our population question and our housing question, then yeah, let's put in 6 stories, 5 or 6 stories of apartments, and that'll put thousands of apartments in there. But it is aesthetically going to be a challenge for the city, and it's going to offer some real traffic challenges. And I think there's a better solution than that. It's a limited area of access to. So just wanted to make a comment, my personal opinion.
Vince, before I get to you, there's one more point I forgot to make. This is not about return to the developer. And this is part of the reason why I said at the outset, it feels like deja vu all over again. This council was presented with an economic report from a qualified economist talking about the realities that one of the charges you gave us was to look at economic development for this area. And the presentation this council was given and the work group was given is that the reality is to generate the new businesses, you need more heads in the city. I mean, the University Bookstore has now been vacant for 27 months. The Pier 1 space has been vacant for 20 months. We can't support the spaces that we have now. And we saw this to Mr. Fawcett's comment earlier, and we were debating 6 years ago, the East Gateway. All we were presented before we got what we ended up with was a true strip mall, gas stations or grocery stores with gas stations, Starbucks with drive-throughs, banks with drive-throughs. And what we heard from the developer who ended up buying the property and developing it was to get the kind of businesses we heard about tonight, you've got to have bodies. That without those 350 units, you wouldn't get the types of the steakhouses and the brew pubs and everything else we heard about tonight. So that's why what has been presented to this council before and to the advisory group wasn't that it's the best bang for the buck for the developer. It was that was the economic reality to get the economic development. You wanted us to look at how we achieve that. The information we were presented was that you need to have some more residential in that area. So it's not about return to the developer. It's about the economic development component. So I don't know if it's the right answer. I mean, we struggled with that. We struggled with what to do with the rest of the area. Do we allow higher height limits in the rest of the area? And ultimately, we decided that we'd focus that on the west side. So with that, I'll shut up and let Vince talk.
Thank you, Mayor. All valid points you just made, by the way. And when I say I've softened on this project, I really have. I want to make a quick confession because when I'm wrong or incorrect, I'm the first one to call myself out. So far, and this might even go to our guest here in the audience, so far, from what I've learned tonight, I'm probably wrong about the farm so far from my initial assessment and the way I voted a couple of years ago. I'm not wrong in the way I understood it would affect the landowners around it. That still exists, but when it came to the economic piece, I didn't see it. I just like, I believe it was I forget the young lady's name. I was the naysayer she was talking about that we couldn't get a steakhouse, quality steakhouse in the farm. So having met several of the residents up there, quite a few actually, at least 2 dozen, I'm open to what this group has to offer. I'm open to any and all suggestions for us to review. I just want to make sure that we just bridle this a little bit, that before we start agreeing, and I know this is phase 1. 1 yard line, whatever term we're going to use, just make sure that, to John's point as well, about just handing over anything and everything. I don't want to lose that opportunity, and turn it into something that it really shouldn't be. And so I'm going to trust the group here. I usually do that when it comes to these things. I think the council, all the input up here is valid. And when we do discuss these things, it's not meant to be a slight on those that have brought forward the proposal. It's just really, everybody's always had an initial twist or a turn or a little soft spot for what they want to do with this project. So that's all that is. And this is the process of debate. And again, now I'll shut up and happily await the next steps. Thanks.
Councilmember Duque, final comment?
Yes. Yes, I think that's why I wanted to make sure when I started speaking to thank, and it's not a patronizing way to thank everyone who was involved. I understand. And I think that's why it was so important to have that committee, because we then don't have anything to respond to. So all the work that was done is it's incredibly insightful. It's very important. And that's how we should do things, and that was part of my trouble. What am I going to say at this meeting? What am I not? Because I don't want it to be like, oh, it went to council and they immediately said no. Because I remember on Parks and Recreation Board, when I was on it, there was a couple of things that came up to council. And even though we had spent a while talking about it, it came up here and immediately was nope. And it was frustrating. So thank you for everyone's time. I did want to follow up on that one question I had. Is there an opportunity for us to do additional studies or to look at other opportunities? What does that look like? What is that process like? And again, I may be the only person up here who would want something else done, but I'm just wondering about those next steps.
Okay, I'll try to respond to that. That's a great question.
Is your mic on?
I'll get closer.
Thanks.
There was a lot of significant work done, but frankly, the only people that the committee itself took the time, several meetings to discuss it and educate themselves on that. That information was not presented tonight. But that information, I believe, will still be valid. We'll probably, as we go through the comprehensive plan, we'll probably update some of that information to make sure that it's still valid. But I think that we're going to have a lot more time through that comp plan update to do more education in a public setting. I mean, COVID kind of sort of threw a blanket over us. I mean, it didn't go as we had imagined. And so I think the PAC worked really good. I think they did do the education. I think they understood what they were making the recommendations on, but you don't have the benefit of that. And so I think there's, like the mayor said, we're still at the 1 yard line, I guess, and we've got a lot ways to go, but we're going to be revisiting this, and it's going to have to go through this. Those same questions are going to come up over and over again, and we're going to have to be able to answer them. And there's some of those comments you had, I have some kind of answers for some of them, but I don't think it's really necessary to kind of go tit for tat on those. I think we have a good thing to put that application together that we can consider over the next couple of years.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the direction they're looking for from us is in accepting these recommendations. It's not saying we bless them, go forward, and we want this to be done. The next step would be for staff to start working on a sub-area plan that incorporates these, that we will have input on through the process and through the planning commission. Could be that at the end of the day, we say, screw it. We just want to leave it as is and not make any changes. Or we could say, we like the recommendation for residential on the west side, but we only want 3 stories instead of 6 stories. I mean, that's all the decisions that we still get to make. And I guess I'll end them before we get in. I guess we need a head nod is I know some of us were frustrated at times, but I think the citizens can be assured that, as you can tell from the discussion tonight, we are thoroughly going to vet this. We're not just going to rubber stamp something. We all have different opinions on what should be done and what could be done and what we want to see happen there. So the positive side of this discussion is that we are going to do the citizens right by thoroughly vetting what the options are and what we should be doing. So with that, Tom, you need us to kind of nod acceptance of the recommendations to move so staff can move forward and move us to the next step of the process for our consideration.
Yes, what we'll do is accepting the document, so their work is done as far as, the committee will not meet again.
Right.
Okay, and so what we will do then is meet our obligation is putting something together that fulfills the deliverable from the Department of Commerce. And at that point, then it'll go to the, as you mentioned, through the whole process with the Planning Commission and City Council as we deliberate and analyze and do public workshops, public participation.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
I think there's some other things I heard tonight that will also go into our factors. This group wasn't chartered with traffic studies, but that is obviously of concern. That was one of the things we didn't have the group go off and try to do that. That wasn't part of this plan. There's valid interest in looking at what do we do on Mill Creek Boulevard? Do we just pave it the way it is? Do we dig it up and put the stormwater pipes and then pave it as it is? Do we just accept it that way, or do we put a lot of money into making it look better? So that was the do nothing option. One of the things though that you talked about tonight was what would be the traffic impacts. And so I think that the other parallel thing that staff will be looking at over the next couple of years for comp plan, the transportation part of that is there another way for traffic to go 164th, 527 and not have this cut through? Is that feasible? So that'd be an engineering study, the kind of thing we would do. The other thing you pointed out is during the comp plan process, we have lots of things to consider. New elements required on under Vision 2050 and the new comp plan requirements for climate change and equity and all kinds of new categories that aren't updating the existing plan. And we also need to deal, as you said, it's about 2,400 people. How do we put those jobs and people somewhere in this? And so I think that's also something staff will in parallel be looking at. Well, if not here, where else would we find those places to be? Is it ADUs in my backyard times 2,400? I don't know. You know, it's got to be somewhere potentially, because if we aren't in compliance with the overall comp plan, we won't have a bite at the apple of various kinds of federal funds that are important to the longevity and health of the city. So it's something that the mandate for the comp plan is being required is too. And I think this is one of the elements that goes into that process.
Well, and one other point on that to John, one of the comments you made, John, is one of the things we can, and probably in my opinion, should be looking at is, do we wait for development to happen 5, 10, 20 years down the road before any improvement is done to the boulevard? Or do we decide to invest money as a city to improve? And we're going to be tearing it up when we have to do the Class Cs in a couple of years. So one of the decision points to the aesthetics is, do we want to make some level of improvement now to make that a more attractive area? I mean, that's one of the things should be discussing. Councilmember Cavalieri.
Thank you, Mayor. Just really quick to follow up. Just so I know, for this proposal, what are the actual zone amendments that are going to be proposed?
We don't know yet.
For this project that's being proposed?
The way it's done now is the commercial areas, the community business zones are pretty much, at least on the
Vince, that's brought to us in 24, we'd be looking at if we're going to consider a change to the comp plan designation, and we'd be also looking at the same time with proposed development regulations that would implement that. So that's all part of the package that we'd be considering.
All right, I agree. And for the educational piece, I think it would be wise for the public to know that if we're going to be changing height, if we're going to be changing density, if we're going to be doing all those things, that maybe we just convey that message now, just so everybody's in the loop. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you for
Thank
your
you.
time.
Good to see you up here again, Tom. Good to see you back. Come back and see us again sometime. Don't make it 2 years again.
Nice tie.
Okay, we are down to our second study session on the proposed anti-camping ordinance. Am I turning it over to the interim city manager or the city attorney?
Thank you, Mayor. I'll start it off. I'll tee it off for the rest of the team. As you all know, back in January 11th, we had a council meeting where council had an opportunity to review the curtain ordinance that the Mill Creek has for anti-camping, which is limited to the parks and so forth. Also, we discussed the limitations that we have enforcing the laws, how we govern, and how we address those anti-camping issues within the city of Mill Creek with our existing laws. Today, we're presenting to you a draft ordinance that includes a lot of different provisions. I think we made it fairly easy, and with guidance of our legal counsel, Grant Degginger, we have the opportunity to review that. And you have an option of given that there's so many provisions in it, you have an opportunity to either exclude a lot of the provisions, keep them. So there's a lot of ways you can go here. This is supported by very productive discussions that we've had in the past 2 weeks with Acting Chief Stan White, in addition to our prosecuting attorney, Chad Krebs, who has a lot of experience in defending similar provisions in his field. So with that, I'm going to hand it over our Acting Chief White to provide you with his experiences enforcing these types of anti-camping provisions currently within the city of Mill Creek, and also he'll provide the challenges given our existing House Bill 1310. Chief?
Martin, before you get to chief, what, just so we're all clear, what is our objective tonight? What are we trying to get to?
Our legal counsel will provide you with a presentation, and what we will do is we'll address a lot of the provisions that are in this ordinance. He'll also cover much of the information that we've covered in the last regarding all the implications that are involved.
Okay, so he's going to go over a proposed ordinance that ultimately we're going to have to give him the green light or not to move forward, for staff to move forward with bringing that
That's
back
correct.
to us.
And it's a lot to unpack, and there might take some time to discuss multiple
Mayor?
weeks. But
Yeah,
If I could, maybe this would be a good time to preview what we're looking for from council. I think I provided a handout for council, and there's essentially 4 things that we're looking for guidance on. It might be good to get them out there now, so that as you hear Interim Chief White talk and Prosecutor Krebs, they'll be top of mind, and they'll help frame some of the questions that you might have along the way. Obviously, we provided the draft ordinance to assist the council in starting to think about what sort of provisions you would want. There are choices along the way. The draft ordinance covers bans camping on all public property. We could limit that to all city property. There's other public property within the city limits, as you know. There's school property, there's water district property, there's other properties. There are concerns about what's the scope of the prohibitions. We're talking about camping, and also prohibiting camping paraphernalia and personal property that would interfere with both the sidewalks and vehicular traffic. There's choices with respect to whether we want to have what's been referred to as a no sit, no lie provision, where people could not be sleeping in public during daytime hours in specific areas of the city. There are choices with respect to whether we make the enforcement. Do we enforce criminally and with civil fines, or do we keep both of those options? Also, as we discussed previously in our last study session, there are limitations on the ability to enforce, and I'm sure the chief will talk about this, based upon the Martin case, if there are no shelter options available. So the next question is a timing question, and that is, before we adopt an ordinance, do we want to also simultaneously look at any potential interlocal agreements or agreements with nonprofits about sheltering opportunities, social services that might be needed, and also talk about what sort of rules we might need to adopt internally to enforce the ordinance and to deal with the personal property issues. So that helps, I think, frame some of the questions that we will be asking of you at the end of this conversation with Chief White and with our prosecuting attorney.
thank you, Grant. Thank you, Grant. Go ahead, Chief.
Thank you again, Mr. Mayor and Mayor Pro Tem, council members, for the opportunity to address you again this evening. My request from the city manager and from the city attorney was to basically give you an overview of what my experiences have been in the last couple of years in regards to campsites that have been brought up in the city of Mill Creek, as well as some of the local areas that we've experienced some panhandling and things of that nature. Over the last 2 years, working with Officer Saga from the school resource officer position here at the department, we've identified approximately 9 camps over the last 2 years where we've contacted approximately 24 individuals. Most of those camps are actually located on private property. We don't have many public property camps that actually pop up, with the exception of the tent that happened earlier this January that was mentioned by the city manager. When we contact individuals at those camps that I previously mentioned, the 9 camps that are on private property, we are doing our part to offer as many social services as possible. We've asked for mutual aid from the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office, from the Everett Police Department, and we've gone out and talked to those individuals, providing them shelter options and other resources that were more humane services, in an effort to help them through the time where they're experiencing homelessness. And so we've been fairly successful with that. We haven't had many of those people move on, or they're they're going to different areas and finding services through those mutual aid affiliates. So we're pretty successful there. So again, we haven't had a real problem with the public camping issue until just recently this month. When it comes to areas of concern where we've had more frequent encounters with public that were blocking right of ways, sidewalks, and things of that nature, it's been more specific to what would commonly be referred to as panhandling. And in those instances, they've been more associated with business areas throughout the city. We currently have 9 or 8 business centers that we've had somewhat of an issue with that, ranging from Thomas Lake Center all the way down to Mill Creek Square, so where the QFC is located. So that whole business corridor along 132nd and then down 527, we've had some interactions with panhandlers, and those typically are on private property as well. And we've had a few instances of individuals on the sidewalk, because when we do notify them that they're on private property and subject to trespassing laws, they move to the sidewalk where it's now public property. But that then creates an issue where we're having a right of way for pedestrians that's causing a problem. So, but again, very few and far between instances. We do have some individuals that are sleeping and lying at night, but most of the individuals during the daytime are associated with panhandling and moved along fairly reasonably. So that's kind of the history that we've had over the last 2 years in regards to this issue in Mill Creek. I would like to present that we are doing the best we can to establish some social services. We see this as, what is the government's interest in using the criminal justice system to enforce these types of issues where individuals are experiencing homelessness. And so I'm doing what I can to create relationships with mental health professionals and social services to see if we can build a more robust program from that side of the spectrum. And then also I'm working with Chad Krebs from our prosecutor's office. We're looking at, should social services not work out, what can the criminal justice system do to help with this problem? But truthfully, we need to address this issue from both sides. So building that a more robust social services program here in the city of Mill Creek is a priority for me. And with that, I'll pass it on to Chad Krebs, unless there's any questions from the council.
So, Chad?
All right. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, council members. Yeah, so the presentation, I think, this particular presentation grew from most recently, at least, was the tent incident back from January, where patrol officers and command staff, were calling my office, kind of walking me through the situation. And we were trying to figure out, well, what if anything can Mill Creek Police Department do at this point if someone is refusing to to leave a space in a situation like that. And presently, the answer is not much. The law enforcement really has, in that situation, very little authority to really to act in any enforcement power. So Acting Chief White and his staff, kind of attacked it with kind of the social service approach, which would be obviously the first step here. And luckily, in that situation, it worked out for the better, and no criminal charges or arrests were necessary there. So the proposed ordinance would basically just, I guess you could call it a last resort, but it would give Mill Creek Police the power, at least at that point, to respond to situations like this. You might have someone who is unlawfully camping in a public place or on a sidewalk or in a park or in some undesignated camping area. It would give them the authority to do something about it. And one of the things I wanted to point out, just generally speaking, I do think it's always important to give our officers the tools they need. And this would be, I guess, a tool in the tool chest that they could respond to situations when situations arise versus having no authority to really do anything in a situation. But just echoing the chief's sentiment, I think the biggest thing that the city should consider, which we already are considering, but the city should really consider is figuring out ways to expand access to social services, shelters, and housing. And one of the ways to go about doing that is, continuing negotiations or discussions about interlocal agreements with, let's say, the Department of Neighborhoods, with the Sheriff's Department that have embedded social workers, other social service agencies that have social workers. Potentially, these are just options to consider. Hiring staff as a social worker. I know some cities have had, I guess, staff share agreements. For example, Linwood and Edmonds for a time shared a social worker that was embedded with law enforcement and would go and talk to individuals in these situations that might be experiencing homelessness, kind of get a sense of why they're in that situation, what services are available, what can be done to try to rectify that. So in terms of actions, I think it's just like I said, a tool for law enforcement. There's a lot of, I think, detailed ways and nuanced ways that the response that the police or the city would need to respond. I think that the whereas language here is pretty safe, and it does keep in mind the Martin v. Boise decision. I know the city attorney and the chief and city manager and I talked quite a bit yesterday about some of the other cities throughout the area that have been experiencing issues with homelessness. Seattle obviously has had a lot of experience with this of late. And there's quite a bit of recent case law coming out of the Ninth Circuit about the Boise decision, for example, and then a lot of action down in Cal Anderson Park in Seattle, and also Skid Row down in LA, which I learned has 1 in 4 of all homeless people in America live in LA County, which I thought was incredible. At any rate, so this is just kind of a tool for the police department to have moving forward in kind of a last ditch effort after, sheltering, social services, alcohol, drug treatment, mental health treatment, whatever might be out there really fails or is just completely refused by individuals in the community, which unfortunately does happen fairly regularly.
Grant and Martin, would the most efficient way for us to have this discussion would be to walk through the 4 questions? Did everyone see the 4 questions that were left on in front of you? Would that be the most efficient way? Because I think the second question on the direction from council page would get to any questions people have on the draft. So I think the threshold question might be a simple one. Does the council want to proceed with having staff move forward with preparing an ordinance for us to consider?
I would say yes.
Is that a yes from the far end of the dais on my left?
I have a question. Regarding if we move forward with this, what I'm hearing is that we need to make sure we have a component for some sort of social worker or some element to an ILA to get help if we are going to actually have our own ordinance. Am I understanding that right, Grant?
That's correct, Mayor Pro Tem. We think it's important to start trying to formalize some of those relationships that the interim chief was talking about, so that there is an inability to enforce the ordinance if we don't have a shelter option. That means we need relationships with some entities that have shelter options or other social service options. It's only when there are options available and social services available and the individual involved declines to participate that we can move toward the enforcement angle, enforcement options as well. And the chief can discuss that a little further. So it seems that, and I think that's the recommendation from our prosecuting attorney, and certainly something that I think our chief was talking about earlier tonight. Chief, is that correct?
Yes, as you pointed out, there are certain things that we would want to offer. Obviously, first, the social services aspect is something that needs to be fulfilled, as well as, just, the difficulties it is with the enforcement. I think that it's important to have an enforcement mechanism in place. Should we not be successful in moving forward with social services or shelter options? Tonight I was made aware of a possible shelter or social service and shelter options through Compass Health, which I'm going to be researching as well. So hopefully be able to report back to council soon with more information on that.
Perfect, thank you. And I also would like to bring up that I had mentioned before that we should look into having an ILA with the social worker. And I believe that in a conversation that then state rep Lovick and state rep Berg had with the former chief, we had discussed that there might possibly be some funds available and grants from the state to help with embedded social workers. So I believe we should look into that option. Thanks.
Councilmember Cavallari.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah. So a couple of things. I want to make sure that we don't misinterpret the Boise decision. It does not mean that Mill Creek needs to provide shelter or social services. It just merely means that if other means are available, they have to be offered. So for instance, if there is a bed at the Everett shelter and we tell somebody that's illegally camping or conduct in the ordinance here that, hey, there's a bed at the shelter, you need to get there, you can't stay here. And he says, well, I'm not going there. Well, then that's the end of the discussion. That's what this ordinance does for you, right? Sometimes we get so far down the rabbit hole that we think that we have to construct this shelter building or have, social workers on standby. And look, that would be nice in a city, of 500,000 people. You can maybe do something like that and absorb it. In Mill Creek, you can't. But I want to make sure that we understand that shelter just merely needs to be available. It's as simple as that. It doesn't mean that we have to provide it.
Councilmember Steckler.
My comment is I like what I heard, giving the tools to our police department. Our police are being called on this constantly, and their hands are being tied. I just want to untie their hands and give them the ability to have some action, to be able to do something about this. I know we'll make the right decisions with regard to social services and that type of thing, but I really want them to be able to take action. I want to untie their hands and allow them to do something.
Councilmember Duque.
I think my question was directed to Councilmember Cavallari because of his because of his day job associated with this, because you said, you know, we don't need to, but I'm hearing the chief say that he would like for that to be an option and he would like that this happens. So my question in general, and maybe you can answer it for me, is the, you know, saying like, oh, there's a bed at the shelter in Everett. Do we then pay for that? Is that what the, like, is that what part of that question is? Like, if you direct them that there's an available bed there, is that what the ILA is, that's saying that if we're directing someone there to a location, am I going down a rabbit hole that I don't need to? That's my.
Grant, do you have input on that?
Well, yeah, and I think the chief does as well. And I think in the practical world, when there's one available, oftentimes a ride is offered to get them there. So there's some action on the part of the city that might be involved. And also the notion of what might be available in terms of either an interlocal agreement with the county or the sheriff's office or another city or a nonprofit would be some sort of way to formalize a way of getting some involvement by others with expertise there that we could use either to assist our police officers or assist or provide direct contact to that person who's unsheltered. And I think there are a variety of models out there. I think we talked about one in our last study session where there was a contract that was done by one city with a social service agency that provides shelter options as well. And it's not necessarily paying for the sheltering, it's providing consulting services to assist the city in linking up the unsheltered person with those services. So there are a variety of ways that may be able to be accomplished. Chief, did you have anything else to add on that?
Yes, I do. So one of the ILAs that we would actually be looking into is to help us with actually acquiring an embedded social worker on a temporary basis, part-time basis, I should say, who can go out and when we identify these camps, you know, some of these camps have multiple individuals living there. When we do identify these issues, we can bring that embedded social worker with us who is supported by law enforcement to provide or to offer services. You know, a lot of times we go to these camps, we offer these services, but they're not always accepted. So this is one of the things where having this ordinance may be able to assist us when those types of situations do occur. But having the ability to have someone there that has full knowledge of the social services that are provided, the shelter options that are available, and not only that, has the direct context. You know, a lot of times officers don't have that information readily available, but to have those individuals actually out in the field with our officers, being able to contact individuals who are experiencing homelessness or for any other behavioral health crisis they may be experiencing, because the embedded social worker would not only be available for this issue, but it would be you know, a lot more broad scoped for us to handle a variety of issues. So that would also be a great resource for us to consider an ILA for.
Councilmember Duque, did that answer your question?
She had a thumbs up.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And I absolutely support the idea of maybe providing additional services through an interlocal agreement. But the point of this ordinance is just like the prosecutor and the police chief and several council members have stated, it provides a tool on the belt for real-time decisions to be made. And that's kind of what you run into here. And it also creates some finality in the sense that you have to ask the question, what do you do when someone says, no, I'm not going anywhere, right? You have to have the ability to move this process along. And that's really what this camping ordinance does. And beyond that, I have a comments on no sit, no lie too, but I'll reserve on those for a moment.
So I'm hearing a consensus on question number one, that we want the staff to proceed.
Yes.
Okay, that's answered question number one. So question number two, we have a draft of an ordinance in front of us, which I believe the city attorney tried to incorporate some of what Councilmember Cavallari had put together. So are there provisions in the draft people have concerns about, think that shouldn't be included? Are there things not in there that you think should be included? Councilmember Duque? Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see your light.
That's okay. It's actually the one section I was concerned about is addressed in number 3. So that would be my, that's what I think. I'm confused why that's included.
I have a question, not necessarily something that needs to be addressed, but I'm curious how do we come up with the penalty up to $1,000? Because I was thinking if they're homeless, I'm assuming they don't have money and they're not paying the $1,000 fee if we fine them. So I was just curious how we come up with that. And I have no expectation that they'll be able to pay that. So I feel like we're just adding insult to injury on that one. So can you explain to me why we need the provision in there for the fine of up to $1,000?
Yeah.
So let me preface it, Chad, and then I'll hand it off to you. But it was typically what we did is included what we have for all misdemeanors. And it was consistent with both the up to 90 days and up to 1,000. And with that, I'll hand it off to Chad.
Yeah, that's correct. I just wanted to point out simple misdemeanors in the state of Washington are up to 90 days in jail and $1,000 fine. If someone were prosecuted for this violation and sentenced, the court will always go through, it's called a Blazina analysis about financial ability to pay. And at least locally within Snohomish County, if someone is statutorily indigent, which is a relatively low standard, I think it's maybe 120% of poverty, or you get any state aid whatsoever, the court typically will zero out most all costs, fines, and assessments in terms of financial penalties, if that kind of helps answer your question. And
Thank you. That does answer my question. Thank you.
Other questions
I'm
about?
not hearing there's any other questions on the proposed draft. Correct? No question. So question number 3. Should the ordinance include a prohibition on unauthorized provision of goods and services within streets and rights of way citywide or only in specific areas? Councilmember Cavallari.
Thank you, Mayor. As submitted in the original draft, I submitted to all of you for no sit, no lie. This has been an incredibly useful component for the city of Everett. I think it's necessary at this point and gives, again, another tool on the belt to make sure that there's, I guess I would call a finality to a situation.
I just wanted to follow up on that with Councilmember Cavallari for a minute. I asked Chief White whether we've had issues with people sleeping during the day, and that's a question that I think he can answer. It hasn't been as big a problem as it has been in Everett. Never had a specific zone, a specific area of town where it was particularly difficult. And it was focused, and the ordinance itself was only in that geographic area. So the question would be, 1, have we experienced this problem in Mill Creek about sleeping during the day? Because these ordinances typically, the no sit, no lie provisions typically do not include the nighttime hours, if you will, the 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. hours. And 2, do we have specific areas where we've experienced that, and where would we geographically identify them if we were to include it in the ordinance?
Councilmember Duque.
My question had to do with with this provision of goods. I wanted an understanding of examples of why it's included. I don't think it should be included in here based off of what we're looking at. And I was intrigued to see that there was a call out for it. So I wanted to understand better, where are we finding this? If there's examples from other cities that I'm just not aware of, how does this come into play with what we're discussing?
this was included in the ordinance that Councilmember Cavallari brought forward. And we did include it here. Chief White could describe the areas, where these areas are, and also what the kind of conduct is that's of concern.
Yeah, so when we have this type of issue, typically in Mill Creek, we've seen it mostly in the business centers, which is again private property, and a lot of times they're handled with trespass warnings. So there's a mechanism in place for that, which a lot of the private property owners or property managers will give us authority to enforce the trespass violations. We have seen this somewhat at most recently at a transit station at 164th and 527. But it was just the one day. We do see some of this at the intersection of 164th and 9th Avenue Southeast, or Mill Creek Boulevard, I should say. And that typically is individuals that are just using the sidewalk and interfering with the pedestrian right of way. But it's more prevalent during the spring and summer months. We're not experiencing a lot of it.
Go to the location. I think Councilmember Duque was asking, what are the goods and services we're seeing people peddling in the rights of way and on the sidewalks?
Yeah.
I mean, if that's not an illegal drug, that'd be covered by other statutes.
Right. There's not a lot of goods and services being peddled, but it actually more along the lines of panhandling.
The workaround from having a no panhandling, since that's not, or I don't want to say a workaround, but is that kind of, am I missing something? Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
I think Councilmember, you've got it. And this is, sometimes it's people giving food to people who are seeking help or
okay.
asking for help. And again, the conduct can be regulated if it is causing interference with the use of the sidewalk or creating a dangerous condition on the street or in the right of way. The actual vocal asking for help by somebody is not, it is protected speech. So there's a difference. It's the conduct that we can regulate, not the request.
So if someone gives someone money on the corner, then what this addresses is that person giving the goods to the original. So it's not the person blocking the roadway. It's if the person potentially blocking traffic to give the person on the corner. It to me, this is just, it's an uncomfortable kind of workaround. And so I just wanted to flag that particular section because I don't want it to stop from what else is happening here.
So help me understand this. If, say, you got a person panhandling by the gas station on Mill Creek Boulevard and 164th, and I decide to walk over to McDonald's and buy him a bag of cheeseburgers and bring them down and give them to him, am I subject to criminal prosecution under this ordinance for providing them goods? Is that what we're trying to address? I'm just trying to understand what this, I think that's the.
I'll let the chief respond in large measure to this, but if you're pulling over in your car and you're handing goods to somebody who's on the street who would appear to be panhandling, that would likely be covered in here. Chief?
I've seen this in Seattle. Yeah.
Yeah.
Obstruction.
This part of the ordinance is actually new to me, and we haven't had this ordinance in Mill Creek, and it's not something that I've seen enforced in this area. But that's just my experience. Chad, do you have anything that you could add to that?
Yeah, I would just say, I know that Arlington had a similar kind of aggressive panhandling type thing where people were requesting money or whatnot up at the off-ramp of I-5 there in Smoky Point. Yeah, but after the Willis decision came out of Lakewood and panhandling was considered, the panhandling itself was considered constitutional protected speech. So a lot of these types of ordinances have been, in terms of at least panhandling itself, have been rescinded or recalled or vacated or whatever the different cities want to do. Yeah, and I haven't spent a lot of time looking into the concept of the questions that I think that are stemming from this one. I know our conversations, at least in our meetings, were mainly on the unlawful camping and responses there. I would note, I mean, obviously just from being in and around Mill Creek, I have not seen an overall issue with this. But I'll defer to council members if they think it's something that the city needs.
In terms of the
This
hierarchy of
this isn't
needs,
in the draft now, correct?
it is in the draft currently.
It is, or I'm sorry.
It
or
is.
Oh,
It is. Yes, it is. So it's
I have,
certainly
I have a
something we,
question. Grant, can I ask a question real fast? before you-
absolutely, Mayor Pro Tem.
Right. I have a question. If we're not allowed to do unauthorized provision of goods and services, what happens to kids that are selling lemonade on the sidewalks?
Well, it's unpermitted. It's, in other words, you can get permits to do something. You can get permits to use the sidewalk for various purposes, including parades or civic events. I suppose you could get one for a lemonade stand. This provision, based upon what we're hearing, is certainly something that we could delete and, reevaluate it and add it later if we start seeing bigger issues or work on the language. It's the one issue that's a little bit closer call in terms of enforcement, and also a little bit more problematic from a legal perspective. But ever had it, we wanted to see if it's something that is the council feels is necessary at this time. It could be taken out and considered later if we deem it more important later.
I'm okay if fellow council wants to delete it. The idea was to eliminate the clog or quagmire on rights of way inside the traffic, inside the turn lanes, which is causing incidents in the city of Everett. It's causing traffic accidents. It's causing other sorts of disturbances where road rage and whatnot. So this was their attempt at fixing it, or their legal fix at fixing it. And so I incorporated it.
Councilmember Steckler?
I was just wondering, a question more than anything else. Would this particular provision be applicable where the police are being called in for somebody who is providing a musical instrument to panhandle money, and they're doing a not very good job of it, and it's quite loud and it's disturbing the peace, and the police get called and they try to stop the person, and this particular provision would help them? Maybe they don't need it, but maybe that's where this might be applicable. It's a question more than.
Chief?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I can understand where Council Member Steckler is going with this, and it may help us with that. But I also wanted to bring attention to officer discretion as well. So just because it's written doesn't necessarily mean it's going to occur. And officers are given the discretion to enforce the laws to their best abilities. So when you do have the young lady trying to sell, lemonade on the sidewalk, we tend to have a little bit more discretion. This has been a little bit of an issue at the intersection of Dumas and 132nd, where we had an individual there that, especially during the early morning hours during rush hour, where people are trying to get to the freeway and make it through their lights. So, no good deed goes unpunished, I guess, is kind of a fitting term, but it can cause problems. And so I just wanted to remind everybody that we do have discretion to enforce that wisely and appropriately.
And ultimately, we're not making any decisions tonight. So I'm hearing some skepticism and wanting to consider this provision a little further before we make any final decision on the ordinance. What about the geographic limitations? Do we just leave it citywide or limit it to specific areas of the city? Citywide?
Yeah.
Consensus is citywide. So on question 3, we still want some skepticism, but we want to think more about the provisions of goods and services, but leave it citywide.
Okay.
So question number 4, prior to adoption, should ILAs or agreements for shelter and social services and rules regarding enforcement be developed and reviewed by council?
I think so.
One vote for yes, or one. Turn on your mic. Councilmember Cavalieri?
Thank you, Mayor. I would say no. The idea, just like the police chief and the city prosecutor and even our city attorney, this is a tool on the belt. It's just an option, right? This is for that moment where options are no longer available and people are simply not complying. So we statutorily do what the law requires and offer a bed we know is open at the shelter. They refuse, bam, there's a law in place to enforce. Holding it up just so we can have a feel-good moment, say, hey, wait a minute, maybe we can get a social worker to talk someone into doing this, or maybe we can, try to find a more comfortable accommodation, is really just defeating the purpose and counterproductive to what we're trying to do here. So we can work on the ILA piece in the interim. We can talk about and see what that looks like. I like what the chief had to say, but it's no reason to hold up what we're doing.
Councilmember Allison?
Yeah, I have to agree with Councilman Cavalieri. The police officers already can use their own discretion and they already counsel, even without a social worker. I hear the chief talk about how he wants to go find that extra support. And that sounds like a great idea, but I don't think it would hamstring being able to put this ordinance into play, give the police officers another tool in their tool belt. It actually helps the people that find themselves homeless, in my opinion. So if the goal is to get people off the street and get them the help they need to get them to be contributing members of society, then I think it can go forward without having ILAs in place.
Grant?
I just wanted to talk less about the ILAs, but also just to make it clear that we will need to adopt rules. We have a provision in the ordinance that authorizes the chief of police to develop a policy governing certain elements about enforcement. And the elements that we're thinking that we will need at about the time that we adopt is a procedure in place for how if we are removing an encampment, what kind of notice do we provide about removal, and how long do we maintain the property that is removed, so that we don't run into a Fourth Amendment issues later on. And so there will need to be some rules developed to implement the ordinance. I just want to make it clear to the council that will be a work item that we'll have to do.
Before I get to the Mayor Pro Tem, can we have a motion to extend till 10, please?
How about we make a motion to extend at 9:45?
Well, we can stop at 9:45. I hope we get done by then. This just avoids us having to continue a second time.
Motion to extend to 10.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Mayor Pro Tem?
Sorry, I just wanted to point out that I misread the number 4 and missed the prior to adoption part. So what I would like to see is us, after adopting this, that we do look at social service options, not that they have to be in place before. So I apologize for not reading closer, but I wanted to clear that up. Thanks.
We have answered the 4 questions. Any other questions, comments, input on this?
Well, if we could add, Mayor, if I could just add a comment, the chief and I had discussion earlier today regarding the cost involved with prosecuting, as opposed to going the social service direction as well. And then there is if I'm not mistaken, a tremendous cost, as the speaker earlier today, and I apologize, I don't remember her name, who gave comments earlier in the evening about the cost involved, all the way from the police's time in addressing from an enforcement standpoint, prosecuting, possibly going to court, the jail time. It might be a big cost to the city of Mill Creek as well. So maybe that's something to consider when we do look at an ILA with potential services from a cost perspective. Thank you.
And just to be clear, she was talking about a 3-day stay in the hospital, to use her words.
So Grant, Stan, Chad, Martin, do you have the direction you need from us?
I think we do. We will fine tune the draft ordinance a bit and bring it back to you, and also work on some regulations for how we would go about the enforcement provisions.
Thank you for all your work on this, all of you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, that brings us to the consent agenda. Item I, approval of checks number 64242 through 64310 and ACH wire transfers in the amount of $387,216.11. Audit committee is Councilmember Steckler and Councilmember Cavallari. Were there any exceptions?
No exceptions.
No exceptions.
And item J, payroll and benefit ACH payments in the amount of $353,482.98. Any exceptions?
No exceptions.
No exceptions.
We have a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? The consent agenda is approved. I actually have quite a few things for my report, so I'm going to do speed report tonight. I think I got 7 or 8. One is the coffee talk with Mayor and Mayor Pro Tem is going to be 6. If any of you are going to plan to participate, please let Martin know so that if we get more than 4 people, we can notice it appropriately. We had the mayor's meeting yesterday. It was a very productive meeting. It focused on various cities' legislative priorities. The main takeaway I wanted to bring to you is I'm reaching out to some of these mayors to get recommendations for the lobbyists they've been using in Olympia, so we can get some ideas for moving forward later this year, so we can have a more affirmative agenda next year. By Friday. Third thing, at a prior mayor's meeting, there was reference to an ARPA final rule being issued, that the comment was that the final rule is less restrictive for the first $10 million of funds. So I have not had a chance to look at the ARPA rule, so I just want to call that out to Martin and Laurel's attention to take a look at. I attended the community transit meeting yesterday where we elected the board for the medium cities that we are one of. We reelected Joe Marine from Mukilteo, who was a council member, now is back as mayor, Kim Daughtry from Lake Stevens, and Jan Schweddy from Arlington. The alternative is Mason Thompson, and there's one other that I can't remember who we've elected. SCT, I highlighted in our earlier discussion what we've been focused on with the growth targets that goes to the county council on the 23rd of February for final adoption. The county executive is reconvening the housing affordability regional task force that he convened in 2019 that I was our representative to, and Mayor Pro Tem was our alternate. If there's no objection, I would be glad to continue serving in that role when he reconvenes it in March. Mayor Pro Tem is willing to be the alternate, okay?
Yes.
And finally, the retreat. Be thinking about it. I'm going to hopefully have on the agenda next week, starting to have a discussion for some potential topics and get some brainstorming on what we might cover at a retreat in March and start talking about dates. So that's what I had. Mayor Pro Tem, did you have a report tonight?
I do. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. First of all, we have emailed out the RFPs, and we have staff has posted those. So we are in the waiting game while we're waiting for those to be returned before the final date. I had my first health board meeting last week, and I would like to report, if anyone is not aware, that they did open a new vaccination site in the Everett Mall. And there is a new mass testing site that's getting ready to be opened in Monroe at the fairgrounds. If anyone is looking for a place for testing, that's in the works and should be coming open shortly. So keep a lookout on that. Thanks.
Councilmember Steckler, any report tonight?
I have 2
Tongue-tied.
announcements. One, I want to get accolades to the Arts and Beautification Board. Tomorrow, January 26th, the city will be wrapping 2 sets of utility boxes with artwork by Mill Creek students, 1 set by Mill Creek Elementary students, and 1 set by Heatherwood Middle School. So that was a project approved by the council last fall, and it is now being finally, the artwork has been converted into wraps, and the wraps will be done on the boxes. So Kudos to the A&B board for getting that done. Also wanted to make an announcement. The good news is the city of Mill Creek and the Kiwanis Club of Mill Creek will once again be conducting an electronic recycling event on Sunday, May 8th. And due to the incredible demand from last year, we will have a contract. We have contracted a full-size 25-foot size truck that will be put on site to handle the demand, because last time we were pulling in dump trucks and pickups and everything else because the demand was so huge. But the good news to citizens is, yes, we once again will be conducting the electronic recycling event on Sunday, May 8th. That's the good news. That's it.
Councilmember Cavallari, any report?
Thanks, Mayor. Just to say that I will not be attending next month's park board meeting. Councilmember Duque, the alternate, has agreed to chair that meeting. I will be attending a WOW, or Women of Washington event. Thank you.
Wow.
We're getting tired. Councilmember Allison.
Yes, thank you. I attended on the 20th, I attended a WRIA 8 meeting. There have been, Angela Bolton, also from the city, attended with me. There was a lot of flooding recently. So there may be some really big impacts to some of the, especially the Cedar River beds and the little eggs and fries that will be maturing there. So there could be a bleak outcome from the spawning season because of those early floods. John Stokes is the chair. Vanessa Kritzer from Redmond City Council was nominated and sworn in as the vice chair of that committee. A lot of talk about all the grants and funding that are available. We here in Mill Creek, we have North Creek. North Creek is part of the Sammamish watershed. So I actually need to talk to Angela. I don't know if there's anything that we do or go after. I don't, unaware of what we're doing in the city relative to that body, but it was really interesting information. And there were some Sammamish watershed has been in kokanee recovery for a few years. So that was interesting. I wasn't aware of that particular species, even though I come from a family of fisher people. So
Fish, not the beer.
yeah. Yes. Okay, that's all I have. Thanks.
Councilmember Duque, any report tonight?
No report.
Interim city manager reports.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor Pro Tem mentioned that we did post those RFPs online, and so we did that based on the lists. Also sent it out to those based on those lists that Council Members Duque, Steckler, and Mayor Pro Tem sent us for all those executive search firms. So that's out. We're just waiting till February 8th to get those collected, and we'll start forwarding those on for review to the council members. The second one is going to be a report by our Chief White. I just want to mention that the lateral hiring process is still a high priority for the city of Mill Creek. We're continuing to work on addressing from a marketing standpoint too. About a few weeks back, we did send out another mailer regarding the $20,000 bonus. Thank you. And so that did bring in a couple of, I think, more activity. It was pretty slow for a while. I think maybe it's just the market just across the region. And so our acting Chief White will give some good news on kind of where we are with the process. Chief.
You're on mute. Chief, you're on mute.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Mayor. I just want to report that we are fortunate to, over the weekend, I was able to coordinate with our civil service examiner, Gabe O. We will be holding a second oral board for lateral candidates this Thursday. We had 3 applicants who initially submitted, but we have only 2 that are going on to oral boards based on their availability. We'll be trying to reach out to that third candidate and have them join that list as soon as possible if we can. And other news that we did have another candidate that has passed all the phases of the hiring process. They're currently going through, have an injury. But we hope to that they'll be able to work their way through that and possibly join our ranks soon. So with that, I'll pass it back off to the mayor.
Thank you, Chief. Any other reports, Interim City Manager?
That's all, Mayor. Thank you.
That brings us to audience communication. Anyone like to address the council before we adjourn? Ms. Heidel and then Mr. Briggs. So Barb, you know the drill, name and address in 3 minutes if you would.
Thank you, Mayor. Barb Heidel, 1401 144th Place Southeast, Mill Creek. I seem to be having difficulty with sound tonight, with things cutting off. First thing off, I did not get the date for the coffee talk that you mentioned, Mayor.
January 31st.
Thank you. It totally cut me off. Okay. This has been very frustrating tonight, missing a lot of the report, especially what Tom Rogers said. Half of it I didn't even hear. On good note, I'm very happy to hear we have 2 new police officers on board. Yay. It's too bad, though, that when acting chief was talking, there was no microphone to hear anything he said. It looked like he was doing swearing in of the 2 officers, but couldn't hear a word. So I wish we had had a microphone there to hear it. Third thing, this whole project on the Mill Creek Boulevard has concerned me since its concept, because of the main issue that I know, Mayor, you mentioned in a positive way about the cut through. I would like to refer to page 7 of the points they put out. Change the function of Mill Creek Boulevard to serve the properties in the corridor, not to be a cut through to SR 527. I would like to know eventually that how do they propose to do that? At some point, they're going to have to ask about that. I'm not opposed to developing the area and having more housing. I think that's fine. And to make it look like a friendly, wonderful city that I have loved. I'm just concerned about the use of the road and how this would be accomplished to not have a cut through, but still have residents have good access. Thank you.
Thank you, Barb. Mr. Briggs, name and address in 3 minutes, please.
Thank you. Evan Briggs, 4015 133rd Street. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. I'm here to talk today to talk about Comcast. To add to my earlier email to the council, Comcast is a multi-billion-dollar company with reported revenue increasing 10.8% to $55 billion in September of 2021. Comcast has a near monopoly on high-speed broadband service to this zip code. As a frustrated customer, I'm asking the city council to consider building its own municipal publicly owned broadband network. Comcast service is unreliable, their service support is unpredictable. I'm sure everyone here has a story about their own time dealing with Comcast. This isn't a regular cable company complaint. We as customers, as voters, rely on Comcast to provide a vital link to work, school, all of that. Nobody should have to spend dozens of hours and speak to as many people to get regular internet service working. As I'm speaking to the council today, I do not have regular internet service. I'm using my cell phone to call into this meeting today. I apologize. It's my first time speaking. At least Comcast could do for me as a customer is to offer some kind of actual solution and not ask me to manage every aspect of their multi-billion-dollar company, such as billing, setup, ordering, installation, tech support, as Comcast asks their customers to do more and more every day for them because it saves them money. I hope the city will see the value in exploring the option of building its own internet utility. And I will work on getting more information to you to assess the viability of this, and would be interested to hear whatever information the council has about this topic. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Mr. Fawcett?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, City Council, for the civics lesson. I think this is where all the work gets done at the city level. And it's been a great benefit to me. I'm retired, so I could just hang out till 11 o'clock if we had to. So it's all good. But you all have day jobs. I understand that. And I was assuaged by the opening presentation there on what's happening with the commercial development out at the farm. You know, we can argue the aesthetics of the apartments there, but that die has already been cast. As far as the proposal here for Mill Creek Boulevard, I frankly liked the presentation. I would caution that sometimes the vision doesn't always match the reality. I frankly like the concept of having a downtown core, much like you have attempted with the town center. I think you can expand on that and be quite successful. I guess my only other thought is I think it would be great for, you know, I'm 68, so I don't really think too much about what Mill Creek is going to be like in 10 or 20 years, assuming I'm around. But I'll tell you, I think of, say, kids at Jackson High School sitting here in a council meeting, because those are tomorrow's citizens, and they need to hear this. I was frankly surprised I was the only one here tonight. I hope that you can garner more in-person participation because it's healthy. So thank you for all your work, and thanks for your time.
Thank you for your input tonight. Appreciate it. With that, and nothing further on the agenda, if there's no objection, we will adjourn the meeting at 9:46. Thank you, everyone, and see some people on the 31st and others on the 1st. Yeah. We have a council meeting on the 1st and the mayor pro tem coffee talk on the 31st.